Folks, today we're going to take a look at the Gen 9 OU official tier list, the Viability Rankings, which was updated quite recently. We're going to take a look at every single Pokemon here, even the obscure ones, and just go through what they do, their place in the metagame, and what we think about them. I'm joined today by fellow YouTuber and professional gamer Pinker Cross. One of the best channels on YouTube for educational Pokemon content, in my opinion. I would urge you all to check it out. How are you doing, Pinker Cross?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me, Jim. It's always a pleasure. I didn't know the VR got an update. I only found out when you contacted me about doing this collab, so I'm really excited to take a look at what's changed. I've taken a little peek, and there are definitely some interesting new rankings and threats that are being acknowledged, so I'm really excited to get into it.
If you don't know, folks, Pinker Cross is a very good ladder player, achieving top 1 positions multiple times over with some really novel stuff, and he told me before we started recording that he's used every single Pokemon on this list, so a lot of experience.
Oh yeah, definitely. I really like trying out. Now, I won't say I've used all of them successfully, but I've definitely used all of them, so I know what they do or do not do. So hopefully I can add something, give some OU player knowledge to this new VR.
We'll kick things off with the very top. S rank is King Gambit and Zamazenta. Makes a lot of sense. I mean, Zamazenta has risen up a lot in people's minds. At first, it wasn't quite this high, like Goldengo and Great Tusk were beating it out, but it seems like opinion of Zamazenta has only risen over time. It makes sense. It's a legendary, and it does have a bit of a stranglehold on things with the Iron Defense Body Press set demanding some sort of response on most teams, as well as some adaptations on it, like Raw propping up and Substitute and other ways to handle its checks that were previously being used, different Terra types as well. King Gambit is no surprise to see up here, as it's been the most dominant Pokemon in OU for as long as I can remember, to be honest.
Oh yeah, I pretty much agree. There's not really much to add here. They're both really, really strong Pokemon. I still think Zamazenta is a little bit overrated. It's really, really helpful defensively and obviously has incredible stats. On the offensive side, though, you really can't ever count on it making progress, which is why I think putting it at the top here with King Gambit is a little bit much. I think it's just not quite that good. I would think maybe A+ or S- just because you can't really count on it to perform that role offensively, and you can't really count on King Gambit to sweep either, but I think it's a little bit stronger with its combination of being able to stop sweepers really well and have that like really strong sweeping potential. But definitely both strong Pokemon, and if not maybe exactly where they should be in my personal opinion, they're definitely very close.
What do you think about them in terms of brokenness? Like, a lot of people hate these Pokemon and think maybe they should be discussed for suspect testing. Back in the day, I definitely felt that way about King Gambit specifically. I guess now we've sort of accepted its existence and things are building around it, and maybe if you banned it, it would kind of ruin the format a bit. I don't know though. But Zamazenta, on the other hand, is even more divisive. Some love it, some hate it.
Yeah, Zamazenta is a weird one. I still haven't completely made up my mind on Zamazenta. I recently actually hosted a tournament in which I kind of created my own OU and banned a bunch of stuff. And I did ban King Gambit, but not Zamazenta. The reason being, I can't fully decide on Zama, because on one hand, yes, those Iron Defense sets can really shut some stuff down, and they can boost up incredibly quickly. And based on different Terra types, it can become immune to Wisp. It can become immune to Paralysis. It can be Resto Chesto and ignore your status in general. It can Terra Dark and get past your Fizdef Glowking, whatever. So it's got so many things that are really scary and so many really scary sets. And it sometimes does feel like there's nothing you can do to avoid your team losing to some Zamazenta set in the end game. But at the same time, it's very rare that it happens to be the particular set that messes you up. I feel like this kind of game, if you have a decent Zamazenta answer, like if you run a physically defensive Glowking or like a Clefable or just a Terra Ghost on a defensive Pokemon, the odds that Zamazenta is really going to be able to take you out, I think, are quite low. I'm honest, I think between Terra Fairy and Terra Ghost on defensive Pokemon being options and things like Dragapult that can wisp most Zamazenta, I don't see it as being a major threat. And as I said earlier, the reason I don't think it should even be this high is it's offensively not very consistent. There are a lot of things that can stop Zamazenta 90% of the time. The reason it might deserve a ban is because it is 90% of the time, not 95, not 100. A lot of these things, even the answers that seem reliable, they can be circumvented by some of Zamazenta's tricks. As for King Gambit, I think it, as you said, the meta's been built around it. I mean, Encore, Dark Resist, Wisp, these are great moves anyway, but they're definitely more prevalent and put onto more teams because of King Gambit's existence. I think if it were banned, it would really only help the metagame. I don't believe believe it's doing any vital defensive role. The main thing that would hurt the metagame is the fact that Kingambit provides a really nice dark resist to a lot of teams, and the main thing would just be the sucker punch, though, the fact that it can kind of threaten sweepers like that. But I feel like sweepers have kind of worked around that. I mean, everything is running substitute or encore, and a lot of popular sweepers on HO now already resist sucker punch. You think like Roaring Moon, Darkrai, Zamazenta, Iron Valiant. So I feel like the defensive roles of Kingambit has overall the kind of offensive and HO teams have learned to work around that. So at this point, Gambit is less useful defensively and less of a glue to the tier than it used to be, and more so just something that can terastalize, and if it's the right Terra, just win any end game.
That's interesting. I feel like most players are down with Kingambit now, but you are still anti-Kingambit a little bit.
I mean, it's not terrible. It's not the worst thing in the tier, but I think the tier would be better if it was gone.
Yeah, at least it's like fairly targetable, like you said, with Wisp, Encore, fighting coverage. There are decent checks to it as well, but the ability is just so overwhelming. And the Sucker Punch mind games, I never like it when Sucker Punch mind games become such a central part of a format. Feels like you end up in coin flip situations a lot, which can be annoying.
Yeah, it definitely does force those. We've certainly never had a Sucker Punch user quite like Kingambit before.
Well, moving on to S- rank, which Goldengo and Great Tusk. This is very fair. Nothing, no qualms here. Goldengo, I personally think he's awesome. I really like him, even though he's one of the most controversial Pokemon this gen. So many people, in every ban video I've ever made, people comment like, why did they ban this and not Goldengo? Everybody hates this guy. But I think he's cool. I like what he adds. I like that he's like a defog answer. It reminds me of Gen 3, the hazard removal blocking and that game plan. Spike stacking. He's got pretty cool set variety. He can be defensive or offensive. I also don't think he's that hard to check as an offensive threat. He's got interesting offensive options. Item variety. I think I like what he adds to the format as this central ghost type that everything sort of orbits around, in my opinion, in a relatively healthy way. What do you think about Goldengo?
I'd say if Good as Gold did not block defog, I would completely agree with you. I would love it as a Pokemon. I would think it's super healthy. It's got a lot of fun options. Its ability causes some cool interactions. It limits stall, which is great because I really don't want to play a metagame where stall is extremely strong. It's very customizable. You can run a ton of different sets on it to suit your team. So it is, in a sense, kind of glue to the tier that way. It gives a great fairy resist, which is a little bit difficult to come by sometimes. But that blocking defog is really what makes me question, because there are so few options to spin. And now we do have great options like Tusk, but when you're building balance, how nice would it be to, say, put on a Corviknight and know that when your Corviknight clicks defog, it can defog, except in rare situations like something sacking a Pokemon or taunt or something like that. So just the fact that you can't really run defoggers because it won't work 20% of the time, I think that's around Goldengo's usage, it definitely puts some restraints on team building that aren't great. So I would say if I became the god of OU, I probably would ban Goldengo, but it would be with a heavy heart. Because as you said, it has a lot of fun things it can do, and it's not too difficult to answer defensively. So my only problem is that it blocks defog, but it's a fun Pokemon, it's got a cool design, and I definitely enjoy using it.
I think maybe a bigger problem is the lack of good defog or rapid spin Pokemon in the format. There's like a couple of good options. People are using Weezing Galar now because it can defog into Goldengo, but it's like so limited in Gen 9. If there were just some defoggers that could also threaten Goldengo, like back in the day, only rapid spin was hazard removal. There was no defog, but like rapid spinners that threatened the common spin blockers were good. So there was like a dynamic you saw, but there's just not as many options, so that you don't see interesting dynamics like that, I guess. There's like Corviknight, maybe Mandibuzz, but not really.
I mean, Mandibuzz knockoff is doing like half to a Goldengo, and then it'll do even less after that. So Mandibuzz is just not really a viable defogger. I think Mandibuzz as a Pokemon is a little bit underrated. Those Iron Defense Foul Play sets, and it's one of the few Pokemon that still gets access to Toxic, but as a defogger, absolutely terrible.
Yeah, like even though you could hit it hard, it's gonna probably still 1v1 you. Just with special damage.
Especially with Nasty Plot. Plot or T-Wave and you're toast.
I think Goldengo would feel way better if there were it just sucks that so many Pokemon that used to get defog that would be really good in this meta just don't. Like imagine Moltres with defog. That would be pretty nice.
Yeah, Moltres with defog probably would make the meta a more diverse place for those kind of balanced teams, I would say.
But yeah, I see what you mean. Goldengo makes those dynamics kind of annoying. Great Tusk. How do you feel about Great Tusk? I feel like it's overall just a solid guy that brings consistency to the format. Is easy to check on teams. It's the go-to spinner. It can do a bunch of stuff. Defensive, offensive, booster energy, tank.
Oh yeah, completely agree. I love Great Tusk. Super fun Pokemon. Can do everything. I think it should be a little higher. I'd say we move Zama down, move Tusk up. It's great. It gets the job done. You can run so many different sets on this. Unfortunately, thanks to kind of Gliscor becoming a main thing, the choice sets aren't really viable anymore, which was kind of sad because I really liked those. But overall, Great Tusk is a super cool Pokemon. Really, really nice design, really fun to use, not that hard to answer. It is absolutely the glue of the tier. Probably the healthiest Pokemon in OU.
I think I'd agree that Great Tusk should be in S rank. Maybe not replacing Zamazenta, but on the same level.
I think it's always been it's been overtaken by Kingambit. I think Zamazenta on some rare moments, but overall it's definitely #1 in usage.
Yeah, Pokemon that's so easy to fit on teams that just works on so many different teams is absolutely S rank in my mind.
Oh yeah, everything but Stall, really.
You could probably maybe you want a different Stall needs to tick specific boxes. Maybe Great Tusk is not what you want, but yeah. Moving on to the A rank. At the top of A+ rank is one of the most controversial additions to the format, Darkrai. It's a first for Darkrai to be in OU. It's kind of cool to see it in OU and be able to use it. But also it's come with problems. Darkrai was kind of the catalyst for what would eventually become an outright ban to Sleep, which a lot of people still think was a bit much. And yeah, as a special threat, it also has overwhelming qualities with its high special attack, great coverage, high speed, and nasty plot. What do you think of Darkrai as a new presence? It's kind of cool to be able to use it, I think.
It is cool to be able to use it. I like its design. It's a lot of fun to use. Something I love about Darkrai too is one particular set, Nasty Plot, Wisp, Dark Pulse, Sludge Bomb, Terra Poison with leftovers. That set just will run through any team. There's nothing that can wall it at all long term. The one exception being maybe a Rest Tinglu, but it's a lot of fun to use. Different Darkrai sets. Scarf is really nice as well because it's be able to outspeed Moon. I like to run Scarf, Wisp, Trick, Ice Beam, Dark Pulse.
That's cool.
So it's got a lot of fun sets, and it is a resource to builders. It also does definitely make building difficult at times. Its speed tier is insane. So when you're building a balanced team, it's not so much of a problem for HO or Stall because they kind of have those unaware Pokemon, unless of course it happens to be a set that can bypass your Clodsire. But it can be a little tough when you're building and suddenly you've got this super fast, nasty plot threat to deal with that has actually pretty solid defenses as well. So I can definitely understand why it's controversial. I'd say I'm leaning ban at the moment, but it definitely is a lot of fun to use, and it is, as I said, it probably puts more pressure on building than its presence is worth, but it is a great resource as well, and every builder should consider Darkrai on their team. A lot of sets it has that are really cool, and it can fill a lot of roles.
Do you think it's like too hard to check reliably? Like its options are diverse and there's no consistent checks to it, or do you think that it's manageable?
The way to answer Darkrai, there are very, very, very few answers to Darkrai defensively. The way you answer it is by putting offensive pressure on your opponent and really not giving them a ton of breathing room, not giving them the ability to set up nasty plots for free. So in a way, Darkrai kind of suffocates bulkier builds that aren't Stall. A Stall team can afford to run like a Calm Mind Blissey and a Clodsire. A bulky Balance, a semi-Stall, a Balance cannot do that. So for a team like that gives Darkrai enough room to nasty plot but doesn't really want to be running a bunch of special unaware walls, those are the playstyles that are suffering from Darkrai's presence in the tier. More offensive builds are okay with it. They can kind of just keep hitting it, and then they have, not let it get up a nasty plot, because its special attack is 135, not like 200. It's nothing crazy. So it's not one-shotting a bunch of things without a boost. And then you can just hit it with whatever's in, not let it get a nasty plot for free, go into whatever fast Pokemon you have on the team and finish it off. So it's really a problem for those bulkier playstyles, and that would be the point at which I'd consider it to be too much.
So it's like an anti-balance guy, which maybe is a good thing to have in a team building sense.
Yeah, Maybe so. I think balance has had a rough go of it in Gen 9 already, even before Darkrai was around. But it definitely does limit those bulkier play styles.
And by the way, folks, these are, I think, in alphabetical order, not numerical order. So it's not like Darkrai at the best of these. They're sort of around even on this level.
Yes,
and it's
yeah,
the same,
good note.
Same with the above ones. But we'll just go in alphabetical order anyway, because that's how they're presented. Up next is Dragapult, who I love. I think it's an awesome Pokemon with set variety, not too hard to check, but at the same time reliable, consistent to use. Just a cool offensive threat. Same can be said in Gen 8. What's your impression of Dragapult?
Totally agree. When I was making the rules for the tour I recently did, some people were requesting a Pult ban. I have no idea what they're talking about. This Pokemon is not oppressive at all. It's fast. It can run boot sets. It can run band sets, which are fun. Specs is good. It's not that difficult to scout. It doesn't have oppressively high stats. Its special attack is 100. It's nothing crazy. Really great resource for building. Cool design. Honestly, overall, just a great Pokemon. Love to use it. Love having it in the tier. I think it's really healthy.
We're in agreement. And also visually awesome, I would say. And I like Dragon Ghost as a typing flavor-wise. Very cool.
Yeah, it's shooting its babies at you, which is a little strange, but we'll give it a pass for its positive metagame presence.
Dragonite's up next. I think this is pretty high from my impression of it. It's really good, for sure. When I'm building Gen 9 teams, I don't use it too often, but it is damn good. It's better than ever now because boots obviously complement multiscale. You can't get multiscale broken easily by hazards. And Terra benefits Dragonite a lot, whether it's just using Terra normal E-speed for that powerful priority damage or just a defensive Terra to give it Dragon Dance opportunities and buff its other moves like Terra Steel, Iron Head, even Terra Blast for coverage it doesn't have, whatever. It makes a lot of sense that it's in A+, but I don't know, my impression of it just from what I've seen in tournaments and my personal usage, I feel like it's not a super auto include on teams or anything?
I'd agree. It's one of those things that's a nightmare to face, but not necessarily that great to use. There's a Dragonite set for every team. When you load up against a Dragonite, unless you're using like a full stall with Dondozo, there's a chance you might be getting smoked by this Dragonite. When it clicks DD, you don't know if it's about to set up a substitute and start clicking Terra Blast Flying. You don't know if it'll hit you with a Terra Dragon Outrage. It might be a loaded dice scale shot set. It is so difficult to deal with in a battle until you know what its set is, and that's the difficult part. But as the actual user of Dragonite, you know what your set is, and you might just not have the right set for your opponent's team, which is a little bit rough. So probably A+ is a bit of an exaggeration, but definitely a strong Pokemon, and it deserves to be, it may be if not A+, at least an A.
That's a frightening idea. There's one Dragonite set that to beat every team. Recently did a Gen 9 bracket with Blunder and Pokémon, and Dragonite ended up winning the entire thing.
Wow, I suppose that makes sense. Yeah, it's got fantastic stats.
Gliscor is up next. I don't know about you, but I've kind of always hated Gliscor ever since Gen 5.
Hate it. Yeah,
it's a popular
love its
Pokemon
design.
though. Yeah,
I love how it looks. I hate how it plays.
Poison Heal's just broken, and it's been broken ever since it got it. In Gen 5 OU, Gliscor is crazy. And it doesn't even have all its options there. It can't defog, knockoff is nerfed. Not nerfed, but it's pre-buff. And yeah, this is like a key Pokemon install in every gen since. I don't think it's in Gen 8, but in Gen 9 it's better than ever.
Which is part of the reason Gen 8 is so fantastic, is they did not have this thing around.
That's one.
And the other thing is, when Roost left, I thought, oh, thank God Roost is gone. Gliscor won't be on stall teams anymore. Oh, how wrong I was.
Who needs Roost? You have them all the healing in the world. You don't need
That's the thing. I honestly think Protect is better. Like, if I were to go back and play Gen 7, I'm not putting Roost on my Gliscor. I'm putting Protect.
Yeah, in Gen 5, I don't think they usually run Roost. Maybe sometimes. But and it has Spikes, it has Terra now.
Yeah, and then those sets with they run Speedy now, so they outspeed your Tusk, they outspeed your Landorus, and they'll run like SD, Tact, Knock, Facade, extremely difficult to deal with. Really just in all of its forms, a plague on the tier. I mean, it definitely is a good resource for builders as well. It can wall a lot of things, it can pack a lot of breaking power into one slot, or it can be really good hazard support. So you should definitely use it, but I think the benefit it gets from just a building perspective from being an option is not enough to justify having such a Pokemon in the tier. I think it's really just an unpleasant presence.
You think it should be banned? I don't know if I go that far. I just hate it. but I'm used to it in a lot of formats. Maybe it's just Stockholm Syndrome or something. But
Yeah, I mean, it's not terrible. It's not by far one of the worst things in the tier. But I think I hate it. You hate it. A lot of people, I'm sure, hate it, and for good reason.
the SD Terranormal Facade set is also crazy. I think I insta-lost to that recently when I was doing some gaming.
Yeah, insta losing to that set is a Gen 9 OU classic. A lot of people do not prepare enough for that set.
It's true. Iron Moth is up next, the most aptly named Pokemon on the list. This is a pretty cool Pokemon in some regards, I think. I like that it doesn't have Quiver Dance, unlike Volcarona, so it's relying more on the temporary booster energy for its offensive power. And Fire Poison's a cool type profile. It's complementary, since Fire hits Steel, which Poison can't hit. It's got good coverage. It's also got, like, I don't think anyone uses defensive Iron Moth anymore, but that was something back in the day that people were doing with boots and, like, Toxic Spikes, which was kind of interesting. Seems kind of bad right now, though. The only thing I don't like about this is Fiery Dance is like coin flippy. Like, if this gets some Fiery Dance boosts, it could just run away with the game.
Yeah, the Fiery Dance boost is a pretty rough situation, and that's kind of why I'm surprised to see it so high as A+. It is a very inconsistent Pokemon. It is so inconsistent for many reasons. One is Fiery Dance. I mean, that being the obvious one, but you also just sometimes run into sets that hardball you. I mean, if you're not Terra Blast Ground and you see a Heatran, it's game over. If you aren't Terra Grass and you see a Ting-Lu or a Garganacl, it's also over. So it's great on a lot of offensive and hyper offensive teams. Actually, I'd say more in a defensive role. It can probably answer Iron Valiant. It gives you that immediate boost of speed if you need something to revenge kill a Darkrai. It absorbs T-Spikes, but A+ probably a bit much.
I think I agree. I guess in that sense, there are so many common things that just halt its sweep potential. And it's a little bit hard to actually eliminate those things, especially... I mean, I guess on hyper offense teams, you could just throw threats at them, probably get through those Pokemon or chip them enough, and then Iron Moth cleans, and then Iron Moth, like you said, has that defensive value on those teams. But that's one team style. On like a balanced team, I feel like Iron Moth would struggle, and other team styles.
Yeah, definitely. You definitely don't want to put at least a booster Iron Moth. You don't want to put that on a team that's not an offense or hyper offense.
Iron Valiant is up next. I have always liked Iron Valiant. I love mixed attackers as a Gen 3 gamer, and I'm glad that there's just like a modern, really strong mixed attacker with so many offensive options. It's so fun to use and build with. It feels like it just always adapts to whatever the meta throws at it. It'll have a set that can adapt to anything. It has cool utility too, like Encore, Destiny Bond. It's got Carmine sets. It's cool as well because it's frail and it's sort of easy to check. I mean, it can always get surprise value with surprise coverage options, but it's always one hit away from just dying. So that makes it feel sort of balanced in my mind. It's also vulnerable to like priority, certain scarf users, etc. So I kind of like this as a modern offensive threat. It's broken, but it also feels more manageable than some of the other broken Pokemon. It's not as straightforwardly broken as some of the other stuff we've seen in Gen 9, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it needs booster speed if it wants to really get to that extremely threatening kind of level where it outspeeds everything. And if it does, that means no booster attack, no booster special attack. And its stats are not crazy. I think 120 and 130, 130 attack, 120 special attack. It's not insane. It doesn't really have any sets that can run through a lot of teams. It's very, very fun to use, a lot of customizability, and yet it doesn't really feel that oppressive in battles because, yeah, no matter what set it is, you can really just hit it with whatever's on the field, and it's not going to sweep your entire team. So you can usually play around Iron Valiant no matter what it is, and it's an absolute blast to use. I'd say one of the really great positive presences in the tier, and it's also just got a fantastic design, really cool Pokemon.
Yeah, and unlike Iron Moth, it does feel like a pretty consistent choice. Can pose a threat to much more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kyurem is up next, who is a kind of a crazy Pokemon in terms of, like, it got suspected and then the suspect was rigged in that whole situation. Like,
yeah, that was a big disappointment.
A disappointment. Well, we've got to maintain democracy, but still.
I was happy it was caught, but I was sad it happened.
It's, Kyurem was also banned in Gen 8. I think since getting Freeze Dry, that pushed Kyurem into new territories of power, for sure. And in Gen 9, it feels like it's at the peak of its power, possibly, with Terra up its sleeve, Loaded Dice, Scale Shot, plus Icicle Spear, and similar to Iron Valiant, it's pretty varied in what it can do, whether it's a Dragon Dance Sweeper, Mixed Threat, Choice Specs, etc. It is at least slow, its typing sucks, and if it's not running boots, it's vulnerable to rocks, and boots don't always feel great on it. At the same time, though, it's kind of a crazy offensive threat to check. It feels like there's no one good check to it, and you're sort of playing a guessing game on what the set is.
Yeah, I made a full video on why I want Cure unbanned, so you can check that out if you want. But basically, yeah, a lot of the things you said are right on the point. It's extremely difficult to respond to when you have a Pokemon, when Kyurem switches in on, say, your Landorus, and you know you need to get out of that situation, and you switch, you might be facing a sub-Terra Ground, sub-Tech Earth Power Freeze Dry set, or you might be facing a DD loaded dice set. And there is nothing you can do to respond to both of those threats immediately. And if you end up guessing wrong, letting a Kyurem get up a substitute for free or letting it get up a Dragon Dance for free are both devastating for your team if you have a bulky team. That's why we've seen, and I think mainly Kyurem and Wellspring, I think, are the two Pokemon to really blame for this. We really just see bulky offense being the most dominant play style, and those kind of more bulky teams other than Stall, the bulky teams that aren't Stall have vanished. Kyurem is the #1 criminal to blame for this.
You reckon that's a bad metagame impact to have?
I would say so. Yeah, it's polarized things a little bit because the teams that are best against Kyurem are the ones that can afford to keep attacking. They have no passive Pokemon. Everything's offensive because, as you said, it's slow, it's bulky, but not incredibly usually invested in bulk, doesn't have healing, has, it's a lot of things hit it super effectively. So if you have a team that can afford to just keep clicking attacks, Kyurem is not going to be a huge menace for you to deal with. But if you're running a bulkier team, you're going to be in a lot of trouble.
That makes sense. Well, whether we like it or not, Kyurem's probably just staying in the tier. I don't know if they're going to suspect it again. That would be crazy.
Yeah,
but
at this point, likely so. But if they do suspect again, I'll be very happy to see that.
I mean, at a certain point, you can't just keep suspecting the same Pokemon.
No, yeah, the reason I think it might happen again is because of how this suspect went down. As you said, there was a lot of kind of shady business involved, and a lot of people using alts that had already been laddered up with. The reason it might be is because the people that were using those accounts were already well-known, successful players that definitely could have gotten Rex, but were just too lazy. Now, I'm not saying that they should get to vote because of that, but it does, I guess, give you a sense of kind of where the community opinion was at.
That's so funny. Like, they're too lazy to queue up.
Yeah, that was a really disappointing fiasco for the OU community.
Well, anyway, moving on to a more positive note, we have Landorus Therian clinging on to a high position here in A+. Very impressive considering this guy almost dropped to UU. He got severely nerfed in Gen 9, losing Defog, Toxic, Knockoff, which are very important options. It also has way more competition now from Great Tusk, Iron Treads, Gliscor, so many strong, bulky ground types. You could even say Ting Lu is a bit of a competitor. The Landorus Therian is a bit more offensively potent than Gliscor is, a Pokemon with the same typing. It has access to U-turn. It poses more of a threat, and special sets are on the rise because of their good matchups into Great Tusk, King Gambit, and other such things. It probably helps that Zamazenta has risen up because Landorus Therian checks Zamazenta really well, especially with a Rocky Helmet, and Intimidate just comes in handy all the time. Cool to see Landorus Therian just proving to be really solid, even dipping into some of its lesser seen options like those special options to stay relevant and keep up with the modern times.
Yeah, Landorus had it rough there for a while, looking like it might drop. I think what really saved it is the tier becoming more offensively inclined. I mean, Gliscor not having that Intimidate, but having that long-term healing is great in a drawn-out game. But if you're facing, say, a bulky offense team, you probably want something with more attack, a stronger U-turn, Intimidate to immediately lower attack and take less damage in the moment, and not really worry about a long, drawn-out game. So I think if we see the meta shift more toward balance, bulky balance, we'll see Landorus suffer once again. But at the moment, it's on top of the world and beating Gliscor in usage by quite a bit.
That's very cool. It makes a lot of sense. Landorus Therian way more immediately impactful. And, I mean, Great Tusk fills its shoes a bit, but Landorus Therian still stands out. Mainly with the U-turn, I think, and in Tim Rocky Helmet being so solid at just punishing threats with pretty nice, consistent progress against them. And its inherent spike immunity, too. It always comes up.
Yeah, for sure. The flying type is definitely big.
Ogerpon Wellspring's up next. Another controversial one. This is ban-worthy in some people's eyes. It's a water grass type Pokemon with some pretty great stats and options. 350 base speed. It has water absorb as well, and it has a really nice stab combination that's pretty widely threatening. It's got Ivy Cudgel, which is a really strong water type move with critical hit chance on it, which is kind of annoying sometimes. The crit chance comes up quite a bit on this.
Yep, 1/8. It's absurd.
What do you think of Wellspring?
Really broken, really overtuned. One kind of in cahoots with Kyurem to kill the bulky teams of this generation. It's just too difficult to deal with. There really aren't reliable answers to it. And I think it subtracts more from the tier in its restriction than it adds with its ability to be used. Now, it does have, I will say, it does really mess up stall, which I like, but its sets has too many common sets that are too difficult to deal with. Like, you can't really switch anything into this Pokemon. If you switch in a grass type, U-turn is at almost 50% usage. Dragapult gets one shot by knockoff. I think most sets of Dragapult get one shot by knockoff. Of course, there's that high critical hit non-contact Ivy Cudgel, so even Pokemon like Zapdos aren't really helping very much at all. It's overall just a really overtuned Pokemon.
Is there not a single good check to this? I'm just thinking, like, because all the defensive mons it will threaten some way. Like Dondozo gets smacked by the grass stab. Skeledirge obviously can't. Tinglu. Like, there's so many of the defensive Pokemon in this format are like ground types or water types.
No, I mean, they gave it too much. There is not a single thing. I mean, it has, the other thing is its mask item. Some people would argue, oh, well, it has to run this mask. That item is broken. That item is insane. If the regular form of Ogerpon had an option to have a mask, it would run that almost all the time. This is a unconditional 1.2 times boost to attack. So this is basically like an expert belt that activates every time. So it's a really great item, incredible boost, really high base power moves, good attack to start with, solid speed. Yeah, it's just, there really isn't anything. I mean, you can run like a Fizz-Def Hydrapple, and that will only lose to Swords Dance Play Rough, which is a set that's quite out of style right now. So you're probably safe running like a Roost Dragonite or a defensive Hydrapple, but those aren't Pokemon that really fit well onto teams a lot of the time. So it's not, it doesn't have enough reasonable answers.
Well, maybe you're radicalizing me a bit. Maybe we're going to get rid of this thing. I think I'm on board.
I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, got to start the movement.
Great Neck is the next Pokemon. Raging Bolt. I think that they really got to update the sprite on this. I hate the mini low resolution Raging Bolts that you see on Showdown. But maybe the model is too large. They can't fit it in there. Who knows? But this is...
Yeah, that may be so.
This is one of the best new bulky special attackers. It's kind of insane. It's Electric Dragon. It's got a new electric type Sucker Punch, Thunderclap, which has priority if the enemy used an attack. Very, very good. Almost feels like a special King Gambit, and it can take advantage of Booster Energy and Calm Mind. Draco Meteor hits like a truck.
Yeah, I mean, this is a Pokemon, it's like a way less toxic, more fun version of King Gambit. I love how many sets this thing has. I mean, you can run it. It's really good on Weather, which is nice because honestly, Weather is having a rough go. It needs Raging Bolt. Raging Bolt is the hero that Weather needed. It's doing a lot for Sun and Rain. You even run like Leftovers, Calm Mind sets. I've seen Assault Vest sets. You can run Specs, Draco. I've recently been experimenting with Scarf a little bit. And then of course there's the classic Booster Energy. Really, really fun Pokemon. Not that oppressive to the tier. And I'd say it deserves its spot on the viability ranking at A+. Great Pokemon, but despite being extremely powerful, just because its priority move, it doesn't have great speed and its priority move has an immunity, it goes a long way to making this more balanced than King Gambit.
That's a good point. Yeah, Thunderclap isn't that crazy because ground types are obviously immune.
And then also it not being able to run Leftovers is pretty big too, because one of the big things about King Gambit is that it can Sucker Punch, and if it guesses wrong, well, it gets healed up by Leftovers. Raging Bolt kind of having to use that Booster Energy to get its own Supreme Overlord, you might say, is a big factor as well in making it a less toxic, difficult Pokemon to deal with. If it could heal as it was guessing wrong with Thunderclap, that would definitely cause some issues.
I think I'm in agreement, even if I don't like the visual design so much. I don't know. I think it's kind of funny as well. But
oh yeah, really goofy design. I thought it was one of the stupidest looking Pokemon I've ever seen, but after I used it and kind of played with it, it's really grown on me.
I suppose compared to some of the other brokered stuff, it's not too bad, is it? It's pretty cool.
No, not too bad at all. I'd say definitely of all the things people talk about banning, Raging Bolt is the healthiest.
That's fair. Hisuian Samurott is next, and this is one that a lot of people do hate. Ceaseless Edge is just a crazy move. Attacks and makes spike. That's nuts. And it's one of those Pokemon that is brute forced into competitive viability off the back lack of one broken move. Without that move, it wouldn't really be nearly as good. It does
Yeah,
have
I
cool
think-
tools apart from that, like Razor Shell, sharpness boosted. Water Dark is a good offensive typing. It's got knockoff. Like, it can do other stuff, but it is really Ceaseless Edge carrying it, and that's the whole reason to use it. It's one of the better hazard setters. It's a hazard setter with some real aggression associated with it. Dark is such a good spammable type. What do you think of its presence? Do you think...
Good presence, honestly.
Good presence.
Yeah, it's not extremely difficult to answer defensively. It definitely is very powerful, but it's not going to really run through your entire team unless you're super unprepared for it. It doesn't have any crazy oppressive stats. Its attack isn't anything nuts. Its speed isn't crazy. It does have priority, but it doesn't get any sharpness boost on any of that priority. So overall, just balanced Pokemon. Very good Pokemon. I'd say it does deserve its A+ ranking, but overall a healthy presence on the tier, giving some teams a way to set hazards and kind of making Hazard Stack as a playstyle more varied. Because Hazard Stack used to be sort of just a thing bulkier teams could do, and now to see more offensive teams utilizing that ability. And now of course you could run Hazard leads in the past, but Samurott gets up spikes a lot better than say a lead Land or like a lead Ting-Lu with double hazards. It's probably not going to get up as many spikes as a Hisuian Samurott. So it kind of brought that sort of hazard stack element to offense and HO, which I think is cool. So really cool Pokemon, really fun design, and shout out to regular Samurott in ZU. Poor guy did not get what he needed.
Definitely a significant upgrade over that one. Yeah, I've always felt a bit mixed about it. It is kind of annoying to face when this is just setting hazards and hitting you, but it will die quickly usually, and you just got to accept that it's making a couple hazards and then try to stabilize it. And it feels similar, I guess, to other aggro hazard leads, which do similar things like that. But this time it's just dealing better damage instead of whatever Glamora achieves, or like even Gen 4 hazard leads and those kinds of strategies. Perhaps it's alright. And I do like Assault Vest Samurott as well, as like a cool Goldengo check that can also get hazards up.
Yeah, Assault Vest is good. Band with Aqua Cutter can be pretty cool. Scarf has seen an uptick in usage after it got Flip Turn. A lot of cool sets. And you even see Swords Dance, especially on some Webs teams, which is fun as well. Some of those Webs builds just try to stack up as many hazards as they possibly can. I guess they figure the Balloon Goldengo is already there. Might as well make the most of it.
Very true. I also like Sacred Sword to King Gambit, that's fun. And then finally, Ting-Lu in the A+ rank, the big spikes / stealth rock setter of this gen. A dark ground type with incredible bulk, some legendary level stats, insane defensive stats, but it's very limited. It doesn't get that much to like abuse its stats. It doesn't get Roost or Recover or anything. It doesn't even get Toxic or Knockoff. It just gets hazards and then like Whirlwind and Ruination for progress, Earthquake. So it's just a big blob of stats that makes hazards. It's a very simple Pokemon in that sense. It's kind of a weird one. It would seem like it could be an annoying Pokemon. I've never found it that annoying though, just because it's so limited. What's your impression of Ting-Lu? Do you think it's all right? Or...
Yeah, I agree. Its limitations are very clear. You know what Ting-Lu does. It does it very well, but it's a healthy presence. It's got a lot of special defense. It'll set some hazards. It won't do that much damage, and eventually it'll die. And also just the stocks in general of all amazing moves like Whirlwind, Roar are really up right now and have been in Gen 9 in general just because of all the Pokemon using booster energy. The ability to bring out a booster energy Pokemon when it didn't want to use that yet, and also just to Whirlwind all the setup and all the really powerful setup Pokemon we have in the tier, even just beyond Hyper Offense teams, is a great tool. And of course, being able to Whirlwind while also having spikes to punish Pokemon coming in from Whirlwind is a great combo.
That's damn true. In modern games, I feel like Whirlwind and Roar aren't always the easiest to fit, but Ting-Lu is just a great user of it because it's so bulky. It has the hazards and it's just great in the meta, for sure. I don't know if anything else really uses Whirlwind or Roar.
Moltres is the other big one.
Oh, yes.
You definitely see it a lot on Moltres. I've even seen a couple great Tusk starting. Yeah, actually, yeah, Zamazenta and Moltres, and then some Tusk are starting to run Roar, which is pretty funny too.
Makes sense with the meta, for sure. But Ting-Lu, I mean, it has, for lack of much better in its moveset, of course, it just chucks on Whirlwind, but it also does feel like a perfect option on it. In the A rank, we've got Cinderace, not at the top, but at the alphabetical top. I like Cinderace. I think it's cool. It's the most convenient convenient Libero/Protean user because its stab move doesn't change its type, so you can preserve the Libero boost. Or change is kind of fun to be able to have some sort of hazard control that works against Goldengo. Of course, it's like a temporary solution because if they match your hazards, then you're just switching and you both have hazards. But
very good point. So like if you're using Cinderace as your only form of hazard removal, you want to make sure you have a team that can get the job done fast. You never want to put this as your sole form of hazard control if it's like a really kind of bulkier build.
That's true. And I like Pokemon like this that are like fast pivots, but they're also a bit defensive. Like it has Wisp, it can tank some hits. Fire typing feels kind of nice. And but it can hit hard with Pyro Ball, which is a satisfying move. It can pivot with U-turn. Even has cool coverage like Gunk Shot, which is always good.
Gliscor's presence definitely hurt it a little bit, but still a strong Pokemon, and its main thing was never breaking down your opponent's team anyway. It was always really about switching around those hazards, so I'd say it deserves its spot.
Garganicle's next. Where do you begin? Garganicle's crazy. This was UU at a point, and now it's A rank. I was always amazed to see it drop down. Maybe that was just meta trends at the time.
Shocking. That was definitely shocking.
Garganicle, one of the faces of Gen 9, I'd argue, because it's sort of memeable. It's a funny appearance. I quite like it. It's grown on me, but it's a damn annoying Pokemon in many ways. The Purifying Salt is a crazy ability. Blanket status immunity from all sources, even secondary effects, and ghost resistance on top. It's just a lot in one ability, and it's got an incredible defensive and utility move pool with Recover, the signature move Salt Cure, which is an attack that deals incredible damage over time, especially against steel and water types where the damage over time is enhanced. It's got hazards, iron defense, Curse is very popular recently, I think. Earthquake is good coverage, even as Body Press to take advantage of its high defense. And it is a premier abuser of Terra, as replacing its rock typing with something like Water Fairy or Ghost is incredibly strong. At the same time, I feel like the meta has adapted to it. It was controversial at the beginning, but like sets like the Substitute Sweeper sets can get around Salt Cure while sort of punishing Garganicle's passivity. And it's nice that those kinds of substitute sweeper sets also match up into King Gambit, so it's not like a specific Garganicle counterplay there. And in general, it feels like the meta has adapted to it with, I don't know how common Covert Cloak defensive Pokemon are anymore, but Covert Cloak is pretty good.
At this point, Cloak is almost never seen on anything. Mostly the way people get around Garganacle is just with kind of defensive pivots. You'll see Glowking being a common thing. Sometimes it's just a really offensive team. Yeah, regen Pokemon are good. Just having a really offensive team kind of works too, because you can just be like, okay, sure, click Salt Cure, take your damage. I really didn't need this Pokemon alive for very long anyway. Then I'm going to go into my sweeping, whatever, Iron Valiant, Roaring Moon, whatever, and click Substitute, and then Garganacle is going to be pretty sad. So it definitely meta has adapted to it a little bit, and it can't take hits that well. Like, it's a very bulky Pokemon. Well, I guess I shouldn't say it can't take hits that well, but it can't both take hits and do what it needs to do. Because if it's constantly, people have this image of Garganacle just constantly spamming Salt Cure, but you can attack it. If you have a more offensive build, you can attack it, do a lot of damage, then switch out, kind of get that free transition into something. So it's a good Pokemon, but definitely not consistent as a sweeper. I personally prefer the Stealth Rock sets. The Curse and Iron Defense variants just sometimes will be amazing and sometimes will just do nothing at all.
Feels pretty passive for the pace of the meta, and it does get very guaranteed free progress with Salt Cure, but sometimes that progress is just too slow against certain teams for sure. Almost like Gen 3 Celebi or something, where Leech Seed is similarly really safe way to make progress and heal, but against an aggressive team, that's not enough progress. It'll just outpace you and take advantage of your passive nature.
I think that's an apt comparison.
Moltres is up next. A rank is pretty high for this. This dipped to UU for a bit, rose back up.
Yeah, I'm surprised
twice.
To see it
I think that happened. I think that happened twice. It went down to UU and OU. Am I right about that?
I don't recall exactly, but that sounds about right. It's definitely had some usage dips, and it's now to the point where some things are running Stone Edge, considering Moltres. It's now a respected member of the tier.
Is this higher than Zapdos too? I haven't seen Zapdos yet.
I believe yes, indeed.
Let's go Moltres. Higher than Zapdos for once. That doesn't happen too often.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if I agree with it being higher than Zapdos, but actually, I guess I probably would. I would say, now that I think about it, I think it is probably a little bit better than Zapdos. Just having that fire and fairy resistance is huge.
Yeah, it feels like a good mon in Gen 9, as Fire Flying with Boots is just a nice defensive typing, matches up well into common Pokemon like Great Tusk being the main one. And it's kind of a good special threat as well. It fits well with the pace as a defensive and offensive Pokemon, where it can give you some breathing room against certain things while outputting a lot of pressure with its strong Fire Stab, which is just a good offensive type. And Flame Bod is a pretty nice way to make progress against things as well, as it just safe way to spread status. And it can U-turn out as well. It has consistent healing. Just pretty solid in my opinion.
Yeah, good summary. It's a good Pokemon, great ability, good tools, not too passive. And then also with its ability to limit sweepers with Wisp and Roar is extremely valuable.
Yeah, Roar is on the rise, as you said too. If only you got Defog though, that would be good. They got rid of Defog on it. But
that's a shame.
Roaring Moon is up next. A Pokemon that, I don't know if I'm having a dream, but didn't this get banned and then it got brought back?
I don't think it
did. It get banned?
Maybe if it did, it was a while ago. It may have gotten banned maybe for a bit in Shedtail meta before they realized that Shedtail was the problem.
It's
not
all a
the
blur,
moon.
I don't know.
Yeah,
but it was also UU at a point. Well, that was before it got knocked off, of course.
Yeah, actually no, I think you're right. I think it did get banned, then it dropped with a new DLC. But this Pokemon remains absurd, and the kind of, it's not great to use. It's kind of at the Dragonite effect. There's a Roaring Moon set for every team. You just got to do your best and hope that Roaring Moon set is not the one that's going to get your team.
Yeah, very straightforward Dragon Dance sweeper. It's a Dragon Dark type. It can use the Photosynthesis boost with Booster Energy, and it has the incredible Dragon Dance Acrobatics combo that works very well with Booster Energy. It has Stab Knockoff, which is just incredible. And it's got great offensive coverage with options like Earthquake and even Iron Head, I believe. So
yeah, it'll sometimes run Terra Blast Fairy in some cases. It'll run defensive sets with Taunt Roost as knock, and the knock is the only attack. Terra Ground is very common. It'll do Terra Ghost to get past even some Zamazenta sets. Really, really difficult sometimes to know what you're up against.
I almost feel like a bulky pivot set would be good on this with Boots and Knockoff U-turn. I think it gets Roost too.
Yeah, that was big back when Chi-Yu was in the meta, and it does still see some usage today. But overall, its defensive typing is just not as good as one would expect.
But
yeah,
U-turn Knock is just a good combo.
For sure. Yeah, it definitely can work as a Boots pivot or as like a Scarf. Scarf has actually become popular on more kind of balanced and offense teams.
I guess probably Dragapult outclasses this for that kind of Boots pivot role with the Wisp Hex U-turn sets would probably just be better.
Generally. Lacks knockoff, but yeah, generally probably Pult is what you'd prefer if you're not running Scarf Outrage Moon.
Do you like it? Do you think it's broken or?
I would say yes, just because of the Dragon Dance sets. If it's the right Terra type and the right move set, whatever your team is, you will lose to Roaring Moon, and I don't think that's really healthy. I'd rather ban Terra, but if it looks like Terra's going to stay, and that makes sense, it is part of Gen 9's key identity, so I think we should do away with Moon. But the problem is, as I kind of said earlier, it's all about percentages. Like, how often is the Roaring Moon actually going to tear into something that beats your team? Not that often. It still can happen, which I don't like, but most of the time, if you have a kind of a normal Roaring Moon answer, you have a Balloon Gambit, you have like a Banded Weavile, you have a Landorus plus some other priority, you'll probably be okay. It probably won't be the set that happens to destroy your team, but it always could be.
I've really loved the rise of low kicks, because I feel like first impression low kicks is so good against this.
It definitely does. Yeah, low kicks, it shuts down the weird Dragonite sets, the weird Roaring Moon sets. One of the reasons I love it so much.
And then last in the A rank is Slowking Galar, who I think is probably the best Pokemon in this A rank. Very, very good and consistent regen pivot with... It's a poison psychic typing, which it's a typing that has its advantages and its disadvantages, but overall it's a really nice check to common stuff like Zamazenta, Iron Valiant sometimes, most special threats, and its move pool is excellent. Future Sight ends up being a pretty nice breaking tool. It's got T-Wave for some progress making and status spreading. It's got Flamethrower to hit Goldengo, Surf, and I think Scald. And you got Chilly Reception as its superstar option, which pivots and sets snow on the field. Fantastic to reset weather when that comes up. Sometimes enable some snow synergy, but most of all just to safely pivot out, which is so good on such a bulky regen Pokemon.
Yeah, great summary. The one correction I have is it does not get Scald. They did give it to Slowbro and Slowking, but only Kanto, not the Galar.
Slowking gets it, but Galarian does not.
But super customizable Pokemon, really, really healthy Pokemon, all the things it can do. It's not oppressive, it doesn't limit building at all, it just makes an incredible, wonderful, customizable tool for builders to use. Really, really healthy presence. And I'd say it should be higher, honestly. I think A rank is a little bit too low. I would put this, I would say S minus. I think it's a absolutely incredible Pokemon that's really reliable, gets the job done. Great addition to many teams with assault vest sets, defensive sets, especially defensive sets. I think it deserves a lot higher than where it's at.
So you'd put it all the way up with Goldengo. It's that good. It is
I think it's that good. I really do think it's that good.
Like in a world that is so offense dominated, as you've been saying, this is one of the things that can bring a bit of consistency and breathing room to teams for its the way it can sustain itself with regen. It can keep up the pace with its pretty impressive damage output, which is important. You can see how Garganacl gets like abused by just not being able to output enough pressure. Galarian Slowking has like both defensive and offensive value, and the pivoting and the regen is just so damn good to enable like entry points into breakers, some momentum recovery. And compared to other regen Pokemon that have been prominent in OU, I feel like it's at least more targetable because of its typing. Like it has some really, really damning weaknesses and you can hit it really hard. It's not actually going to stick around forever and just wall everything, because it probably, I feel like in most games, Galarian Slowking has to like choose to take one super effective hit and lose a lot of its health. Like that usually happens, like maybe a Dragapult Shadow Ball or something, or it's usually threatened by something and it has to like make a choice to lose a lot of its health, which I think is a good thing. So it's not walling everything in the world. That's what makes it feel healthy, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. It's not like a Toxapex type of situation. It's where it feels like it never dies. They also almost never run recovery. Because there are so many great options you want to run. You want to run Ice Beam, Future Sight, Psychic Noise, Sludge Bomb, Thunder Wave, Chilly Reception, Flamethrower, Psyshock even. You aren't toxic, right? You're almost never going to say, oh, I want Slack Off, because you've got regen already. So that also makes it less of a annoying wall and more of a helpful, healthy offensive pivot.
I don't even think about how this getting Slack Off. You never see that.
Oh yeah, I think its usage is
doesn't fit that well.
It's negligible.
And here we are in the A- rank, and at the top is one that you're very familiar with. You're partially responsible for, Alomomola, who's had a significant rise in Gen 9 OU. It was kind of the go-to bulky regen Pokemon, but besides Slowking Galar, I suppose. But it's kind of like the new Toxapex or maybe Slowbro from last gen, where it's just this bulky blob of stats that can spread Scald Burns, Flip Turn, and pivot out. It's got Regenerator for incredible longevity, and also has Wish support, which is something that none of those other ones have had before, which is really strong.
And for those of you that don't know, Wish is based on the HP of the thing that uses it. It doesn't just heal 50% always like it did in previous generations. So Alomomola, having a ton of HP, can Wish Pass to another Pokemon, and it can gain 90, 80, 70% of its health back, which is a big deal as well. I would say it's a bit overrated though. I mean, A- is pretty high for a Pokemon that's made so inconsistent by Ogerpon Wellspring. I think Alomomola could easily be at least like an A flat, maybe even an A plus Pokemon if Ogerpon Wellspring wasn't in the tier. But being food for probably the most threatening breaker in the entire tier is a really rough state of existence. And you have ways of hitting it like acrobatics, but it can't one-shot with anything. And if you're not running acrobatics, because most Alo do want to run boots, not only does that take up a slot on something that's useless unless you're facing an Ogerpon, but the other options are things like Body Slam, and they're not very strong. So it kind of has this one fatal flaw being Ogerpon, but otherwise a good Pokemon. But for that reason, I feel like this A- is a bit of an overrated place.
It does suck when you just stonewalled by something so common. Do you think that's a positive thing? Because Alomomola might be pretty annoying if it didn't have such a flaw. It would be way more worth running. More teams would probably be using it, and it would almost be like Toxapex all over again, especially with such a strong Wish, as you mentioned.
I would say if Ogerpon were to leave, Alomomola being a much higher usage Pokemon would actually be great for the tier. Bulky pivots have not made the metagame really toxic in the past. If you think about Slowbro, for instance, in Generation 8, which is a good comparison. I think the comparison to Toxapex is a little bit different, mainly just because if Toxapex had Flip Turn, then it would be more apt, but Pex is kind of just a sit there and do nothing wall. Alomomola enables other Pokemon. So it's kind of like a Glow King, like a Slowbro sort of thing. And those Pokemon were typically not just sitting on stall teams and walling you out the entire game. They were used on more offensive builds and allowed a lot of Pokemon and a lot of cool team structures to function better because they had that bulky pivot. I would say the more functional, slow pivots are in a tier, generally the healthier it's going to be. I'm a big fan of those Pokemon and what they do for the meta and strengthening balance as a whole. But if you don't like balance, then yes, Ogerpon Wellspring getting banned definitely would not be your favorite thing for the tier.
I guess what I take issue with is when something so bulky with regen has such good typing as well. Like, Mono Water is just really good in general, and it can feel hard to actually nail down and eliminate a Pokemon like Alomomola, in my opinion. At least Slowbro had the psychic typing.
That's a good point. The kind of one way you do get Alomomola is that its special defense is terrible.
That's true.
So it's very, very weak. I think it's base 45. So you can kind of hit it with a strong special hit and it'll drop. And if you can't do that, the only reason you wouldn't really be able to do that if it's Assault Vest, you take away its ability to wish. So it has to shore up that major flaw, it has to give up one of its biggest strengths.
Fair enough. As it stands, it's a pretty solid, bulky pivot, but definitely flawed against the Ogerpon Wellspring matchup, as you said. Up next is Deoxys Speed, who is another new addition like Darkrai that got unbanned after a long period of just being default Ubers, and it's been an interesting one. I remember when this first dropped, you were playing with it a lot on like screens, HO teams, and different kinds of HO builds. It's I don't know if the screen set is as popular as just a straight up offensive set these days, because it has so much coverage and it actually is a pretty nice late game cleaner because of that, because it just outruns a lot and it's hard to guess which coverage it has. But I don't know how popular the screen set is at the moment.
No, you almost never see screens anymore. Grimmsnarl and Dragapult are more popular, and I think for good reason. They're probably better screen setters. But Deoxys Speed, I mean, as you said, it can do a lot. It can be elite, it can set rocks, spikes. I've seen like Psycho Boost, Eject Pack, Life Orb sets, Nasty Plot, Recover sets. So it's not one of those Pokemon. There's no one set that's like, wow, this is great. This Pokemon's amazing. But I think it probably does deserve its placement on this viability ranking just because of how much it can do. It can kind of serve your team in the way you want it to.
I think it's a cool addition, to be honest. I like it because it's not too strong, but it's so diverse. Like on the offensive side, I mean, it's not too strong. It's like 90 special attack or something, isn't it?
Yeah, base 95 in attack and special attack. I agree. It's not too suffocating at all. It's a fun Pokemon, not anything crazy, easily stopped by priority, but really gives you a lot of fun things to play around with in the builder.
Glamora's up next, a new superstar of Gen 9, who at first was used mostly for just hazard setting lead sets, still is used for that, but there's been some like Glamora evolution with the Meteor Beam set being really popular. Scarf was popular as well back in the day. I think now it's still seen sometimes. It's an interesting Pokemon with a lot of different ways to use it.
People did get a little bit more creative with Glamora. They sometimes run, it was always Sash. Now you see some red card Glamora, some will run Air Balloon with those hazard leads. And yeah, you do see Meteor Beam too, which is a lot of fun. So I'm happy with the way Glamora has been innovated with. And it is definitely a very solid hazard setter, as well as also being a T-Spike absorber, which HO struggles with a lot. So it's great to be around for that.
Yeah, simple and cool Pokemon for sure. Interesting new addition. Iron Crown is actually pretty high here, A-. It's such an interesting thing, the rise of Iron Crown. One of my favorite things that's happened to Gen 9 recently, because I think it's an awesome Pokemon. I like the Steel Psychic typing. It reminds me of like Metagross back in Gen 3, Bronzong back in Gen 4. Pokemon that I like. It's a fun typing. But it almost feels bad these days because it goes to Dark Weakness. Oh, such a problem. But Iron Crown is just a well-positioned, like, I think it's just a really good Assault Vest user. With Volt Switch for pivoting, the multi-hit Steel special attack is nice to like break sashes, and also happens to hit a lot of relevant stuff. Future Sight is good for breaking.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the AV set's definitely the most popular, and that's what's given that's what got it the usage in the first place, because there was really no answer for Kyurem. For a while, people were using different forms of Galarian Slowking, whether that's Assault Vest or just specially defensively invested, and people wanted more Kyurem answers, and there was Iron Crown able to hit through Substitute. So I think the rise of Crown really came when Substitute Kyurem started becoming more popular. But nowadays, another set that's growing in popularity is Choice Specs, which is a really fun one, because with Psyshock and Psychic Noise, it can actually really threaten stall teams.
That's awesome. I wasn't aware of that development. There was also, I think, some teams running weakness policy, stored power, agility stuff. That seems very all in though. You gotta build your whole team around like getting through the checks, especially King Gambit would give that problems, though you can run Terrablast fighting, but
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it does get Focus Blast for King Gambit,
Yeah.
which you sometimes see, but the sweeping sets are, frankly, they're just not very good. If you run a sweeping Iron Crown, you're probably putting it on the team mostly for defensive reasons. But yeah, just as an offensive sweeper, I mean, if you see a Ting Lu, you can't really touch that. If you see a King Gambit, you have to Terra to get past it. So the sweeping sets are really not great and just beaten by a ton of high usage Pokemon, but they're definitely viable. But absolutely, what keeps Crown at the usage it is that Assault Vest and Choice Spec sets. Those are definitely the strongest two.
You think it's a fair rating? It feels like a pretty consistent Pokemon, fairly easy to fit on teams, but not quite.
I would agree. It does a lot. It's not one of the kings of the tier, but it's solid. It's a good staple. I'd say it definitely deserves A-. I might even put it in A, but A- is pretty fair.
Dang. What a cool rise that is. I remember everyone thought this sucked when they first saw it, but it's risen up to fill a pretty important role, which I love to see, developments like that. Iron Treads is next. It's always been in the shadow of Great Tusk, who feels way easier to use, better offensively, hits King Gambit. But Iron Treads, of course, with ground steel typing, has its value. Better against fairies and stuff. It's a bit faster as well. It's quite threatening with booster energy, has options like Volt Switch to pivot. And I think there's like a Steel Beam set. I don't know if people are still using that.
Yeah,
that was something.
you do sometimes see lead Steel Beam so it can KO itself and avoid getting Rapid Spun or Defog. So you definitely do see that. And one other thing that kind of made Tread stocks rise is the addition of Raging Bolt. Getting that Pokemon in the tier really made Treads more valuable because it can actually, it's one of the very few things that's comfortable switching into Raging Bolt.
That's true. It's very similar to Excadrill in previous gens, but I like that it has unique options like Volt Switch and Booster Energy and stuff.
Yeah, in the context of this generation, outside of a Sand team, Treads is simply a superior Excadrill. I mean, having access to moves like Volt Switch, Knockoff, Ice Spinner, Excadrill was for some reason denied. I'm shocked they didn't give Excadrill Ice Spinner, but it's definitely better, has better stats overall,
Knock is
better
a huge
speed,
one.
better ball.
I forgot about that. Excadrill does not get Knock.
Yeah, so if you want just like a Steel type spinner on your team, it should always be Treads. Sadly, there's just no point in using Excadrill unless you're using it with Sand Rush.
That's a shame. I've always liked Excadrill, but that's all right. Low Kicks is next, who is also having a real moment right now. Feels like it's a recent trend that Low Kicks is rising. Pretty cool Pokemon. Its stats are really average, but it just has fantastic offensive stab moves as a Bug Dark type. It's got U-Turn, Knockoff, First Impression, and Sucker Punch. All of those are just really, really good and easy to use because of priority or progress making or pivoting, momentum generation. And of course, the ability Tinted Lens makes all of them hit through resistances really hard. So it's just dishing out really consistent damage, and it works really well with bulky pivots to get it onto the field and just get a free high value hit in the books and then get out safely, or get rid of an item or revenge KO something with First Impression. When you say all that, it's almost like, how have we never been using this before? It's just such a consistent threat that gets value every time it's in. Resistances be damned.
Well, one thing to note is it's not like Low Kicks has entirely been sitting, unused in the closet this whole time for no reason. It has had some, but also it did get a pretty significant buff. Knockoff was a DLC edition. When SVOU started out, Low Kicks did not have Knockoff.
I forgot about that,
have
actually.
That for a long
I forgot
time.
about that. I thought it always had that.
Yeah, so I was a lot more optimistic when I saw it get Knockoff, and I've tried using it on stream a couple times. It's always been a really, really strong bring. It's seen some solid tour usage recently. I'm not sure if I'd put it in A rank. That's a lot to put on the little bug, because the truth is it still is inconsistent. 4 times bug resists are not that hard to come by in OU. I mean, you've got Corviknight, Heatran, Goldengo, probably some others I'm not thinking of. Yeah, like Moltres for another. And it does have that contact move struggle. But the good news with Low Kicks, if you have a Low Kicks team with bulky pivots, you've got a near guaranteed win against hyper offense. And that is an incredible thing.
Would you ever like protective pads on that? Probably not, because the damage output's so bad.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, this Pokemon has, I don't know the exact attack stat. I think it's something, I think it's in the 90s. It's not terribly good. You do need a choice band Adamant Max invested. If you run, a lot of people try to minimize its weaknesses, its weakness to Flame Body Static, or its weakness to hazards by running boots. But in reality, if you give it boots or pads, you're taking away the one thing it really does well, which is KOing and just destroying a bunch of Pokemon on offense. Like if you Terra Bug, you one-shot Dragapult. You can sometimes, if you face an offensive team, you can just keep bringing this thing out and just spam First Impression and kill the entire team. And if you give it any item other than Choice Band, you're taking that away from it. I feel like every other item is a bit foolish.
I would agree. Play to its strengths. just try to run a consistent spinner of some sort, maybe a hat, and go in with the big bug. It's such a cool Pokemon. Love it. Love that it's pretty viable. I don't even think A- is that crazy for it, but it is definitely, it suffers from rock weakness and contact weakness, but yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it down much. Maybe B+, but it's definitely a very viable Pokemon.
Pecharunt is next, and this is one I gotta admit I don't fully understand. Because I made a video recently and people were a bit upset with me for saying it, but I said that Pecharunt was like overrated, or I didn't get why people kept using it. In a recent tourney I was watching, there was so much Pecharunt usage, but its win rate was just not that good. It felt like it was just getting stopped by so many common things. It does have some stuff going for it. It's got a massive defense stat, pretty nice move pool with recovery, the malignant chain, which confuses and toxics at the same time, which is crazy. Hex is easy to abuse on it. It's kind of a great Tusk switch in with if it has Balloon and it has such high defense and it can spin block. But maybe you have more insight into why Pecharunt is rated so highly here.
My guess, and I don't know for sure, as I'm not personally a big fan of Pecharunt, but it does two really great things in one slot, and that is answer Zamazenta very consistently and answer Ogerpon Wellspring very consistently. And those are some things that can be quite difficult to build for. So having this Pecharunt here that it can spin block, it can parting shot out, because the nasty plot sets, nobody's really using that. Almost every Pecharunt is recover, parting shot, malignant chain, hex. So if you're facing a more offensive team, that Malignant Chain can put a lot of pressure on your opponent. You can use Parting Shot to kind of get out of a lot of those situations and just bring something in. And it's a fantastic pivoting move. Parting Shot is definitely one of the best, lowering that attack and special attack while switching out. And just with that 160 defense, it can switch in and take, I think, 30 from an Adamant Ogerpon Ivy Cudgel. Like, that's incredible. That's really what is appealing about it. And also, it can even bypass its dark weakness with Colbur, giving it kind of one free parting shot against a threat like Roaring Moon or Darkrai or Weavile. So it's fairly good at what it does. Is what it does enough to justify an A- rank? I would say no, but I definitely understand why people use it.
I somehow did not think of this being such a good Ogerpon Wellspring. It also threatens it super effectively. That's massive.
Yeah, that's probably the big thing, because building against Ogerpon Wellspring has become a nightmare. I mean, it used to be like you could put on, like a Rillaboom on your team or like some kind of grass, maybe even throw on like a Synthesis Superior. But since the U-turn sets became popular, it's just so tough to build around, and Pecharunt offers kind of a way out.
That's fair then, to be honest. Checking Zamazenta and that's so consistent. And then it does other stuff, as you said. That's quite good. My apologies to Pecharunt. Primarine is up next. Is filling the shoes Tapu Fini once filled. There's no Tapu Fini anymore, of course. There's Water Fairy typing, which is fantastic. It's got pretty diverse amount of sets too. It has Flip Turn for pivoting, which is always great. It has the Calm Mind Draining Kiss sets. It has Psychic Noise, which can be water type if you want, for heal, blocking, a bit of stall breaking. Pretty cool Pokemon that I think is a great presence, like just a solid defensive Pokemon that can do a few different things. A- I think is very fair for this. It's pretty damn solid.
Yep, I agree completely. It's a simple Pokemon. It's fun. I guess the only thing I'd really have to add is there's a really fun set you can run to almost always beat stall, which is Subterra Ghost with Calm Mind Psychic Noise Draining Kiss. Pretty funny because the water type Psychic Noise, having no immunities, your opponent can't even Terra Dark to get out of it, and with Subterra Ghost, Blissey can't Seismic Toss you. So you can sort of just Calm Mind up and sweep any team with that.
That's devious. That's brilliant. Love that. Tinkaton's up next. This is damn high for Tinkaton. I can almost see it, but it looks crazy to look at. I don't know if I buy this. Tinkaton is Steel Fairy, perhaps the best typing in the game. It has a lot of utility. Knock off T-Wave, Rocks. It can hit pretty hard with Gigaton Hammer. I don't even know if you run that though, but it's an interesting option.
They typically do. They usually do, because they just want some strong hit to make it not so passive. But definitely, I think it's maybe on about half of them.
I think a recent development has been Pickpocket, right? Because you can steal an item without having to run knockoff.
Yeah, Air Balloon Pickpocket is really popular.
What do you think about A- for Tinkaton? Is it rising for any particular reason recently?
Really, the reason it became part of the tier is really Darkrai. The fact that it can switch in easily and take not much from Focus Blast, Sludge Bomb, Dark Pulse, and Ice Beam is amazing, and because that destroys almost the entire tier. So Tinkaton coming in and being able to take that easily is why it is where it is in the tier. And then just it's very irritating with that Pickpocket plus Air Balloon combo. So you kind of have to pop its balloon and then it'll steal your item. It's also just got a lot of really good moves like Stealth Rock, Knockoff, Encore, Thunder Wave. So as a rock setter, it's one of the best, and it provides a ton of defensive utility while doing that. And even being a not a bad Kyurem switch in either. So it deals with a lot of extremely threatening Pokemon while also setting rocks and has a ton of utility. Now, that being said, it is a weak Pokemon with no recovery, and all it really does is annoy the opponent, knock a couple things, get hazards up, and it can't even do that consistently, right? Like if you face a Gliscor, all you're getting is rocks. Tinkaton really can't irritate Gliscor at all. So maybe A- is a little bit too high, but you absolutely have to respect how many unique and difficult things it does.
For sure. I really like the Pokemon design-wise. I like that it's got that OP typing, but its stats are pretty weak. And yet it has such a good utility move pool too. I think it's cool.
Yeah, it's definitely fun. And there is one really silly set that I'll briefly mention, which is SD Mold Breaker, that can really run through some defensive teams with Gigaton Hammer and Terra Blast Electric. Not a good set, but if you're looking for a cheesy Tinkaton to run, that can definitely get some people.
Sounds fun. Weavile is in A-. I think it's a pretty straightforward one. It's a fast boots attacker with triple axle knockoff, same it did in Gen 8 basically.
Yeah, really not much to say. I mean, we banned Xian Pao and then Weavile got knockoff back, so we welcomed it to the tier.
I feel like, has it been that popular recently? Is it A- deserved?
It's maintained. I think it's maintained barely OU status. Maybe I would probably put it in B+, but it's a decent Pokemon. I mean, it's fast, it's priority. Ice priority is really, really good in OU, and it is a fairly reliable breaker as long as you're carrying Icicle Crash, so you don't have to risk contact against Moltres and Zapdos.
True. And speaking of Zapdos is right here, and I think, what is this, A-? I think A- sounds fair for this. It's Zapdos. It's doing what it's always done. It's an electric flying type. It benefits from boots. It has static to spread status very safely. It has roost for some longevity. And it's got a nice stab combo for the tier, I think. Hitting Great Tusk, Ogerpon Wellspring, whatever. Volt switching around, high special attack.
Yeah, it's also one of the few Pokemon that you can put on the team and pretend you have an answer for Wellspring. I say pretend because if one critical hit happens, you're done. But if it doesn't happen, you can switch it in a couple times and threaten Ogerpon with the Thunder Wave.
Probably a decent enough, like half check to Ogerpon most of the time, because they can't really click grass moves into it. You force it out at least.
Yeah, it's definitely a solid thing to have on your team if you're struggling with Ogerpon.
That's good. The B+ rank begins with Clefable. There's no real surprise that Clefable's solid in OU. We all know what Clefable does. Magic Guard Fairy type with every move on the planet. Do you think this is appropriate for Clefable? Do you think... I always get the sense that Clefable's like underrated and people will realize it's better over time because it's just one of the most consistent things in history. I don't know if that's true in Gen 9. Maybe Gen 9's a time where it's finally falling off a little bit, not completely, but you know, it's not as dominant as it once was at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, you have a good point. It seems like Clefable starts off not kind of low usage and always climbs its way back up. In Generation 9, I think it has finally met its match. And I know that's a bit controversial given Clefable as it's every single time it's managed to rise to S tier, seems like in every generation of OU once you leave it behind. But I think this generation's power level, things like booster energy, and the fact that so late into this metagame being what it is, we still see bulky offense and not balance being the dominant playstyle. I think Clef has finally met its match, and it probably deserves to be in B+, and for the first time in a long time out of A.
Yeah, it is a very fast-paced metagame. Maybe its bulk is not good enough to handle everything like it wants. But of course, it'll always be fairly solid. I'd be surprised to see Clefable ever drop from OU. It's just such a fundamentally good Pokemon.
Yeah, I'm certain it'll stay OU, and it definitely still has a lot it can do, but it's facing competition with this typical just rocks roll with things like Tinkaton, and it's feeling its stats.
Corviknight is next. Now, Corviknight is interesting. It's a steel flying type, of course, with Roost U-Turn Defog. It has Body Press and Brave Bird as attacking options. It has some other sets like Iron Defense and stuff, Power Trip, but it's usually just a utility defogger. It's kind of the only good defogger. There's a couple other niche ones, but Corviknight is the best, and it's facing some real struggles with the addition of Goldengo to the game, who can block a defog and also threaten it significantly. At least Corviknight can U-turn as it comes in, popping balloons and getting pressure up, but defog is not the safe hazard removal option it once was, which is making Corviknight feel a little bit less worth running on teams. It's still very good, and it almost, sometimes some Corviknights are even dropping defog at this point because there's no realistic way to actually defog consistently, so you might as well run some other thing.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely right about that. I think about half of Corviknights, maybe a little less, run defog, but it's still a solid defensive pivot. It's not great, but it's there. It's an OU staple, and it will be for a while.
Yeah, simple Pokemon. Dondozo is up next. And Dondozo is the ultimate wall of this format. It's mono water type with unaware and incredible stats, so it will be really, really effective against most physical sweepers that boost in the traditional way. And that's about all it does, because its moveset beyond that is very limited. It doesn't have good healing, any sort of hazards, utility status, anything. It just has curse and some attacks like wave crash, body press, waterfall, etc. So it just exists pretty much to wall things. So that will limit how many teams it fits on, because it's usually a stall or very, very defensive team only choice. But it does have a very important job, and it does it well.
You know, what's a bit sad is before we had things like Raging Bolt and Wellspring in the tier, Dondozo, offensive Dondozo, was a real threat and actually rising in popularity. Sets like Curse Tech Rest Wave Crash or Curse Rest EQ Avalanche, like fun sets like that really were a thing, and offensive Dondozo was on the rise. But in the current meta, with Ogrepon existing, making Wave Crash a lot worse, and Encore having a huge rise in popularity as well, we do, as you said, just kind of see the boring Dondozos that are meant to do nothing but wall, rest, talk, 2 attacks typically.
That's a shame. Avalanche just sounds like a fun thing. And I've always liked Wave Crash on this, because it feels like it can stomach the recoil pretty well and actually hit surprisingly hard.
Yeah, Wave Crash is fun, just don't see it much anymore, since typically the stall sets want to run Avalanche Body Press for Gambit, Avalanche for threats like Roaring Moon.
Enamorus is up next. This is a Pokemon I rated very highly early on, and maybe that was fair in the previous metas before more DLC got added. But overall, it's a really solid attacker. It's a new genie, so it has similar stats to the other genies. It's fairy flying, which is a great typing. It has cool mixed attacking options. I think more popular sets though are like Calm Mind and Scarf with Terrastella. I think that was more of a flavor of the month gimmick though, as it's kind of it feels like a bit of a waste of the Terra, but it's still an interesting option sometimes as just a neutral attacker that ramps. What do you think of Enamorus? It's one of those Pokemon that seems like it should be really strong, but ends up being sort of middle of the road.
Yeah, well, it was outcompeted really by Iron Valiant as the fairy type with coverage.
That's true.
It doesn't have as good mix sets. It doesn't have the same speed. It doesn't get moves like Knockoff and Shadow Ball that it would like to have. So it does still have roles. It has Healing Wish sets, which are fun. Some Terra Blast Stellar boosting sets with Contrary do still exist. But mostly nowadays it is just Scarfer for the most part, because in all other roles it's sort of outcompeted by Iron Valiant.
Healing Wish is a genuine good option, especially on HO.
Yeah, if it didn't have Healing Wish, it might drop to UU, honestly. It's one of the very few things it can do better than Iron Valiant.
Hatterene is up next. Very solid Magic Bounce Pokemon, the premier Magic Bounce Pokemon with Psychic Fairy typing. It's very slow, but it has solid stats elsewhere. It's got an interesting variety of sets too. A popular one on offensive teams is the eject button, so that it can pivot out as soon as it takes a hit. So doing 2 things in one, pivoting and preventing hazards from being created, which supports various threats that hate hazards. That was popular on weather teams back in the day, I recall. And there's of course very bulky sets you can use with this. Magic Bounce has its defensive value, providing status and hazard protection, and it can really ramp with Calm Mind, Draining Kiss, and Terastallization for defensive benefit as well. I think it's a very solid Pokemon. It's not always easy to fit, but nothing else can do what this does.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's a lot of fun to use, and I want to shout out one set in particular, which is Nuzzle Calm Mind, Draining Kiss Future Sight. A lot of the problem with Hatterene is that you really want that Calm Mind sweeping potential sort of sitting in the back, so you have this threat, but at the same time, if you run Calm Mind sets often, it's a bit too passive and can't really contribute to the team if it doesn't win outright. So running a Calm Mind set with Nuzzle and Future Sight gives you that ability to, even if Calm Mind is not a win con at all, still contribute to the rest of the team.
That's a very interesting set. That's like in between the 2 sides of Hat. That's like right in the middle. You got the utility and the Calm Mind.
Yeah, and another fun thing about that is you actually get the Future Sight will hit based on the boost you have while you're in. So you can Future Sight, set up a Calm Mind, and then it'll hit as if you used a boosted Future Sight.
Wow, I didn't know
which is really crazy.
That's very cool. I did not realize that. That's some secret technology. Hydrapple seems pretty high. It's kind of crazy seeing this in the same tier as like Corviknight and Hatterene, but it is solid.
Yeah, I am a bit surprised.
It's a decent Pokemon. It's Grass Dragon with regen. It's got a lot of of cool offensive moves. I really like the Pokemon, but I haven't found it that consistent. And there's also a Stole Sticky Hold set that was running around too. Do you think this deserves to be here? Have you used it to much success?
I would say it maybe a little bit lower, probably just regular B. But yeah, Nasty Plot sets on this can be quite good with Fickle Beam. Regenerator, obviously an incredible ability. And its big thing, although it definitely loses to Play Rough, but those sets are becoming less common, Walling Wellspring is huge. The fact that this thing 4 times resists both of Wellspring stabs really does deserve a lot of respect. And being able to have Regenerator and have such fantastic resistances as Hydrapple does, there's really a lot of value in that. So I'd say it deserves to be, maybe if not quite this placement, pretty close.
Does it take a lot from U-turn from Wellspring, or is it bulky enough to regen would shrug it off fairly well?
It can stomach that. I mean, it takes a little more than the regen damage. You're probably taking about 40 on a max HP set, but it's not hating the U-turn. The only set it's really losing to is going to be SD Play Rough.
Interesting. It's so interesting how Wellspring's presence impacts things. You think things rise in viability because they can switch in, and things suffer as a result of getting farmed by it. Very high
we've
impact
really
Pokemon.
we've never had a breaker like that before. Well, other than Ogerpon Hearthflame, but you know that they did away with that.
Maybe like Gen 7 Kartana had a similar impact. I feel like everything slower than Kartana just sucked. Because it was,
with the Z moves, it was
tier.
pretty unwallable.
The Katana speed tier was very important in Gen 7.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah, that 350. Or that, well, Kartana being 348 made that 350 a big deal.
Yeah. Latios is up next. I didn't realize this. Is Latios on the rise? The classic?
No, I'm shocked to see it here. I don't think it deserves to be here. I mean, it's really inconsistent. It's weak to Dragapult. Its defensive typing is terrible.
That's what I would have thought, yeah.
It's like choice spec sets are powerful, especially with, being a 130 special attack Draco, and with its new toy Luster Purge with a 50% chance to drop Spadef is nice too. And it does have Aura Sphere to hit Kingambit, so I won't deny it. It has good coverage, good stats, but no, its speed is not great. Loses to a lot of top tier threats. If you think about a lot of the fast Pokemon on the tier, gets U-turned on and knocked by stuff like Cinderace and Meowscarada. It's weak to Darkrai. It's weak to Dragapult. I think it actually loses. I don't even know if it can kill Zama with a Luster Purge and it dies to 2 crunches. So I'm shocked to see it here. I don't think it deserves to be here. I would give it maybe B- C+.
Interesting. I do wonder why it's here. Was there a team that succeeded with it? Has it been popular on HO? If anyone has any insight on that, let me know. Because it does seem like it's got a significant uphill battle with so much in the tier, outrunning it, threatening it, and even switching in on its stab. Like, Dragon is not what it once was. You can't lock into Dragon moves, especially with a choice set, and be safe. You can't really spam Psychic moves. It has a lot of good coverage, though. It has Trick and Healing Wish and stuff like this, but... Oh no, it doesn't even get Healing Wish. Latias gets Healing Wish.
If anyone else knows, as I said, you put it, as you already said, maybe put it in the comments. I'd like to know too. I don't know of any team that's doing very well with Latios.
Let us know, folks. Ninetales regular. Cantonian Ninetales is here, which is damn high and really surprised me when I looked through this. I, in fact, brought this up in my video. But I looked into it, and it does make a bit of sense, as Ninetales fits a little bit better than Torkoal as a sun setter in this format, I think. Just because it's faster, it has options like Encore, which is great utility. And it can actually outrun and threaten like Great Tusk and stuff. It's just a bit more proactive than Torkoal is. Torkoal previously outclassed this because of its rocks and spin sets and being able to wall stuff and spread burn. But Ninetales probably fits better in Gen 9, wouldn't you say?
I would agree. I think Ninetales is by just a hair the better Sunsetter. And something else, it gets Healing Wish. That's another big thing. So the sets
really
you're
good.
Going to typically see Healing Wish, Encore, Wisp, Weather Ball.
Healing Wish is damn good on Sun. It's with so many high value things to heal back up in this format.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes the other thing Sun struggles with is actually getting Torkoal off the field, because you've got this Torkoal, which is, nice and defensive, but it's not particularly threatening. So your opponent can kind of just contently let your Torkoal stay in and take advantage of it, maybe even set up on it. And Ninetales just doesn't let that happen. And if you want to try to just switch around on Ninetales and let the Sun turns go to waste, it can Healing Wish itself out of the battle, which is big as well.
And Ninetales Alola is right under, alphabetically, of course. I feel like it's kind of one-dimensional and it feels like it's fallen off. It was really strong back when every powerful boost sweeper of all time was still available because Aurora Veil just had so much value to it.
Yeah, especially Baxcalibur with the snow boost.
Yeah, that was really something. Suppose you could still use this with Curum, but how good is this in the modern day? I feel like I'm not seeing it as often. Even other screen setters have become more popular.
No, it's not good at all. I don't think it deserves to be in B+. I would put it, once again, maybe C-, B+. Main reason being Cinderace. If you have a Pokemon like Grimmsnarl, you can kind of just set one screen and Parting Shot, and then you've got, say you can set up, if you set up Light Screen, you can Parting Shot off the Cinderace and go into a physical setup sweeper that won't care about the court change, and now you can set up in front of a Cinderace that's weakened, or you set up a Reflect and go into a special setup sweeper. Ninetales doesn't have that flexibility. You have to set up both, and then a Cinderace can take your Aurora Veil, which is really bad. On top of that, it can't touch Cinderace. So you kind of have this Pokemon that if you see a Cinderace, it's like, well, okay, I guess my Alolan Ninetales is useless now. And of course, you've also got the 4x steel weakness. And yeah, it's not great. I don't think it should be here.
I think I agree with you. I will say I'm not as experienced in Gen 9 as maybe some other people are. Maybe there's people succeeded with this that I'm not aware of. It's probably ranked for some reason, but I would agree. It feels inconsistent. The Cinderace punish is crazy. I didn't even think of that, but yeah, you could literally take their Aurora Veil and what do you do against it? Nothing. You just hope
I mean, consistency is just such a big deal. If there's one Pokemon in the tier, even if it's only like, 7% usage, if there's one Pokemon in the tier that completely invalidates your existence, it makes a Pokemon so much less worth using.
That's very true. I always hate that when one Pokemon just ruins you. Up next is Ogerpon Teal Mask Form, default Ogerpon, which I have to be honest, I don't even know why you'd use this one. It has Defiant on it. It has an item slot. It's got, I think when it terrors, it gets speed, which is interesting. And it has like rapid spin spikes. Maybe it's a spike setter.
It does not get rapid spin. It does get spikes, but not rapid spin.
When I looked at this at first, when like the Ogerpons first came out, I was just thinking, wouldn't you rather run Masquerada? But maybe you can enlighten me about what regular Ogerpon has to offer.
Yeah, I'm actually a big fan of regular Ogerpon, to the point I'd probably even say it deserves A-. And the reason being that speed boost is just incredible. Having something that can Terra and become that fast, as well as having Defiant for Landorus, which is kind of the tier's most popular physical wall. Well, other than say Tusk and Zamazenta, but those don't really take an Ivy Cudgel very well, and especially with Defiant, neither does Landorus. The reason you'd use it over Masquerada is really just power. I think the best set by far is Choice Band. You can slap a Choice Band on this thing and then get a speed boost on top of that, and then start swinging with a non-contact banded Ivy Cudgel, which is not as great when it's just a grass stat, but it's still a very strong move, and you have coverage to take out the Pokemon that would threaten you. You've got Knockoff for the birds to take away their item, and you also have Rock Tomb, which can one-shot Moltres from a banned set. So you just run on this thing, Knock, U-turn, Ivy Cudgel, Rock Tomb, and it becomes this incredibly scary threat that's the tier doesn't really have many answers for.
That's awesome. I want to try that now. That sounds really cool. Almost like a weird Katana. And Rock Tomb doesn't make contact either, so that's a pretty nice multi-punish, isn't it?
Yeah, the lack of contact, the how safe it can be, like the fact that you can click your Grass Stab into a Moltres and not worry at all, means a lot.
Rillaboom is here, which I think is very fair. Very good Pokemon. It's the grassy terrain setter of the tier, which enables a lot of different HO, and it itself is very solid with great move pool, knock, U-turn, grassy glide, massive stab on wood hammer. I think it's a very straightforward. Should this be higher? I don't know.
I think absolutely. I'd put it honestly in A. Just solid A. It does so much on a team. I mean, it's one of the few things that can kind of switch into Wellspring. Of course, it's not liking a U-turn set, but it still threatens it a lot. Having that banded glide is amazing into those hyper offense and more offensive builds, and it's also amazing against stall. If you have a Pokemon that can get rocks up on a stall team, there is nothing that can take a Terra Grass Woodhammer. There's the only thing is Corviknight, but if rocks are up, you can knock, U-turn, kind of just chip it down slowly.
Even the grassy terrain chip hill comes up and it supports allies in a unique way, shielding you from Earthquake. It's good with like Garganical, probably, and other such fellows. It could even be good with the Ogerpon band set you mentioned.
Yeah, it does a lot. You can build your team to appreciate grassy terrain too. So I'm shocked to see it in B. I think that's unfair Rillaboom slander we have here.
Yeah, very good Pokemon. Scizor is up next, which I like to see, classic Pokemon. But Scizor has really suffered this gen, losing Roost and feeling a little bit weaker overall. Pretty high ranking for Scizor. I suppose it still has good priority, good pivoting. Does it still get defog, or is that one of the things that also lost? think
it does get defog. I mean, it's not a great defogger given Goldengo can outspeed it, hit it with strong attacks, and
Yeah.
take a bullet punch very well.
And it can't heal.
But it can use defog. You do sometimes see sets that'll run like SD knock a bullet punch defog. It's kind of something you throw on a Scizor for a more hyper offense build. I'm a little bit surprised to see it this high though. It suffers to contact moves. It doesn't get past Zama. It doesn't get past Corv. All the typical physical walls that wall everything also handle Scizor. So I'm a little bit surprised to see it this high.
Feels like it would get really punished by all the Rocky Helmet users, Moltres Zapdos, and pretty easily stopped in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've used it, and I can say you're right. It's exactly as bad as you'd think, which is why I'm so surprised to see it here.
Well, it is still Scizor. Bug Steel, good moves, but
yeah, it definitely does help a lot into HO. I will say, Steel Stab is fantastic into a lot of threats like Roaring Moon, Iron Valiant, Dragonite.
Absolutely. Sinistcha is up next. I love this Pokemon. I love Cup-based Pokemon, and I think this is maybe my favorite Gen 9 Pokemon the more I think about it. I love the Grass Ghost typing with Heat Proof as an ability for fire resistance. I like its move pool. It's got Strength Sap, which not many things get. Amazing move. It's got Matcha Gotcha, the signature move, which is Health Drain plus Burn chance in one on a grass move. Very, very good attack. And it's got some cool options beyond that. I think it can be a Carmine Sweeper. It has Scold if you want. It has Hex. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, it's super cool. And install sets will even sometimes run Foul Play variants to deal with Wellspring, which is really fun. Yeah, its main claim to fame and popularity is being the best spin blocker. This thing can switch in on Great Tusk all day, and it deserves where it's at. Maybe even A-. It's definitely a very solid Pokemon.
Let's go. I said this would be good when I saw it, and it wasn't for a while, but maybe I'm vindicated. Maybe it's rising up to its true potential. Ursaluna's up next, which is a Pokemon that at first people thought was broken, with its incredible attack stat, Guts boosted Facade being just a massive nuke. It was on the radar for a suspect test, I think, at a time, but that never ended up happening. We were being a bit hasty there. It's not ban worthy or anything, and in fact, it dropped down to UU for a time. I think it probably isn't it still UU?
I think it may be. Yeah, it's not particularly good in OU. It deserves low usage. There are some sets I've been experimenting with some bulkier leftovers variants that instead of using Flame Orb themselves kind of rely on the opponent to status or not, and those sets I think have more potential in OU. The classic Flame Orb variants can work well with Alomomola though as wish support, and they are effective breakers. It's nothing crazy, it's nothing great, it's vulnerable to chip, it's got a lot of weaknesses from its typing, and it's slow, but it does do what it's supposed to do very well.
Yeah, it's a simple Pokemon. Walking Wake is next. Another one that was like, people were screaming for this to be banned at first, and myself included. I thought it was broken. But, a bit embarrassed looking back on that. It was fine after all. Water Dragon type, pretty interesting Sun Abuser. One of the more unique ones. It's got the Hydro Steam move, which gets buffed in the sun, unlike every other water move of all time. It's a twist on the weather mechanic. It's one of the better Pokemon to use on sun teams because it just fills that important defensive profile of having a water dragon type on there, which is really nice. Just fills out important gaps, and it just hits really hard. Has Flip Turn, Stab, Draco Meteor. Pretty damn solid Pokemon. It even has fire coverage, which comes in handy.
Yeah, I would say even mandatory on Sun. I mean, it's a simple Pokemon. You run Choice Specs or Mystic Water or Wise Glasses or something like that. And I personally prefer booster special attack sets, but having the option of booster speed and special attack without sacrificing much of either is great as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and some people will run DD sets. They're trash. Please don't.
Yeah, I tried some DD back in the day, and it was pretty bad. Galarian Weezing is up next, and this is a beautiful development. It's one I talked about in one of my recent videos. The reason this is rising up, I believe, is because Neutralizing Gas, Defog, is able to remove hazards against Goldengo. It's one of the few things that can. And on top of that, it's a pretty decent support Pokemon. It's got Poison Fairy typing, so it's great into Zamazenta. It has Will-O-Wisp. It can Pain Split for some form of sustain. It's pretty good into Iron Valiant and other fairy threats as well, because it has Strange Steam to one-shot Iron Valiant, who is very frail. And Neutralizing Gas has interesting application elsewhere too. It can disable Poison Heal temporarily and allow you to chip Gliscor a little bit. You obviously can't come in that safely against them, but you can also disable, I think, Photosynthesis and Quark Drive as well.
That's correct. You can deny even Weather from being set from Drought and Drizzle if you lead against a Torkoal or Pelipper. And one other fun thing to mention about Poison Heal is if you switch in Weezing after Gliscor has been in for a while, that toxic damage still racks up. So even though the Gliscor is not feeling it, so you could, if a Gliscor is being being in for 20 turns, you could switch in your Wheezing and do like 90 to the Glass. Or I don't know the exact calc, but you can hit it really hard, which is pretty hilarious.
That's true. The Toxic still ticks as if it was doing damage, even though it's not doing damage to Gliscor. So if their ability ever gets disabled, it just destroys them. That's one of my favorite interactions, actually. I love that when that comes up. What do you think of it? Good ranking? It feels, honestly, really good. I'm very impressed with it. It's not going to fit on every team of all time, but it does some really important stuff, and it has a lot of good application.
Yeah, I would agree. Fairly placed. Good Pokemon.
Here we are in the B rank. Araquanid is, many are saying it's the best sticky web setter in the game at the moment, just because it's got good bulk. Ribombee formerly was, but Ribombee kind of gets owned by Iron Crown, and Araquanid tends to trade up in lead matchups with Mirror Coat and stuff, and Water Bubble hits like a truck in certain scenarios against like Tusk. Kustap is also cool with Endeavor.
Yeah, Kustap Endeavor sets with Special is actually what they run. They almost always don't run Physical Liquidation, and they do that so they can do more damage to Pokemon like Great Tusk, like Gliscor, Intimidate Landorus. And I would agree, I think it's the best web setter. And Webs is, it should be noted, a very viable playstyle. For the first time in a generation with heavy-duty boots, Webs has strong enough Pokemon that it really is a threat to be respected.
Yeah, it's a simple one, but Araquanid happens to be a very nice web setter in the current meta. Clodsire is up next. It's interesting seeing this so low. I suppose it makes sense in the current meta, but Clodsire has been such a consistent and good Pokemon for a long time that probably deserved higher in the past. Just a really, really good special wall with 2 fantastic defensive abilities. Usually uses Unaware, and these days, pretty much just relegated to really defensive teams. As we've mentioned many times, the passivity of Clodsire can be taken advantage of for sure, but still absolutely a valuable choice on the teams that want it.
Yeah, if you're not running it on a stall or really bulky team, you're almost always going to want a different ground, whether that's, Glandorus, Gliscor, Treads, but it is good on stall, so there is that.
How's Greninja in the current meta? It has the new Battle Bond, and it's a decent Protean, but probably not the best Protean guy anymore. I haven't seen much Greninja.
Yeah, as a Protean, like a Protean specs Pokemon, it's not very good. It's outclassed in many ways in various roles by other Pokemon. I mean, if you're going to want to click specs Ice Beam, it's just so much weaker than Kyurem. Its stats just aren't that great for being a breaker, and it can't get past a lot of the special walls in the tier. So the best set is Battle Bond, but it's sadly very unreliable. There are a lot more consistent sweepers you can run. It does have the benefit of having that Water Shuriken priority, but that priority is extremely weak. I mean, with only 15 damage per hit, you need quite a few hits to be doing meaningful damage, and it still is walled by a ton of Pokemon. So it's not consistent. I would say it's ranked too high on this list.
True. It's ranked alongside Clodsire, which doesn't feel fair to Clodsire. Hawlucha's next. I feel like Hawlucha's pretty good. It obviously doesn't fit on that many teams because you need to run something to activate Unburden, but I've used Hawlucha teams quite a bit with Rillaboom, and I've been impressed with them. I think it's just a really solid cleaner, similar to how it was in previous gens. Gen 7, this was everywhere. What do you think of Hawlucha? I just feel like Acrobat, it's got such a good offensive profile.
Yeah, I'd probably put it in B+. It really appreciates Terra. It's a good user of that. Being the fastest Encore Pokemon, factoring in Unburden is great as well. Yeah, I mean, it's just it's a really solid Pokemon, and it is almost an auto include on terrain teams.
Agreed. Hoopa Unbound. I feel like this is a pretty good breaker. It's surprisingly bulky. Its typing sucks, but it hits incredibly hard with a very ignorant move that's spammable. The Dark Stab just goes crazy, and it works really well with so many of the pivots, and it just outputs so much pressure. That's pretty good, I think.
Funny thing is, a lot of the most popular set, which is Assault Vest, actually doesn't run Hyperspace Fury at all.
Really? Okay.
But Choice Band still does. And one of the fun things about that is with Adamant Terra Dark, you can bypass a Kyurem substitute and one-shot it from behind that substitute. And of course, if you're running Bandit Hoopa, you'll never have fear of a stall team ever for any reason, which is great too.
I was not aware there was an Assault Vest set. My knowledge is lacking on that. What's the Assault Vest set for?
Yeah, so the Assault Vest set is typically going to run Drain, Punch, Knock, Thunderbolt, and Psychic Noise. So the addition of Psychic Noise allowed Hoopa U to break without having a choice item. So that set will, it'll do it more slowly, but it will break bulky teams nearly as surely as a Banded set will, while also also taking advantage of Hoopa's massive special defense and giving it some of that defensive utility. Now, of course, the AV set is still really suffering to U-turn, but if you structure your team with some Pokemon like Zapdos, Moltres, or some Rocky Helmet users, you can still punish that and use it well.
That sounds very good. I didn't even think about Psychic Noise. That's a great get. Love that. Keldeo is up next. A former superstar of OU in Gen 5, an almost S-tier Pokemon. Hasn't felt as great ever since. Kind of respectable that it's apparently in B rank in Gen 9. I wonder how good it is. Like, I haven't really seen it, and I'm not sure how it fits here. I guess it matches up nicely to King Gambit.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, for any offensive purpose, it's terrible. It can't break worth a can of beans. Spec sets are awful. Calm Mind sets are inconsistent. It does have flip turn and good defenses. So water fighting is defensively pretty solid, being able to switch into King Gambit and, you know, some other random threats. Things like, Greninja is one. Things aren't really coming up off the top of my mind, but a Boots pivot set has been used with success on some hazard stack builds, and Vacuum Wave is a very nice move to have.
Maybe it's like an alt Primarina then, because at least it also resists steel.
Yeah, I'd say that's a good comparison. It's kind of like an alternative Primarina.
It's a bit more aggressive. Does it still get Scald? A lot of stuff lost Scald.
It does not, sadly. It lost that.
That would be good, but...
Yeah, but so if you want to use Keldeo, use it defensively. If you expect the Keldeo to break, it will not, ever.
It sounds decent. Flip turn, water fighting. Sounds pretty good. And Vacuum Wave actually is quite nice. That hits quite a bit of, like Roaring Moon or... a lot of different stuff. Manaphy's next. This was really good when it first dropped alongside in those Aurora Veil teams. Now it feels like it's dropped off a cliff. It's a Tailgo Sweeper. It has Take Heart, which is Calm Mind that restores status. It sounds pretty good.
The cliff from which it fell was actually a Raging Bolt the whole time.
That's
and
damn
at
true.
the bottom, awaited a Wellspring. Those were the two that really did it in. I mean, you've got two of the highest usage Pokemon in the tier. I think they're both top 10, and they both absolutely destroy Manaphy. And there's really not much to say other than that. I mean, it still shreds bulkier teams, but the play styles that Manaphy is best against, because it's not necessarily an incredible stall breaker, since stall has things like Unaware Clodsire. What it really is an incredible balance and bulky balance breaker. And as I've said many times, those are the playstyles that are suffering most in Gen 9 OU right now. So Manaphy is like the opposite of anti-meta. It's good against the playstyles that are bad, and bad against the playstyles that are good.
How unfortunate. But maybe it's a good thing. This was a pretty frustrating threat when it was meta, I would say. It ramps so quickly.
Yeah, it was difficult to deal with, especially with the Take Heart Acid Armor sets.
Oh, yes.
And they gave it stored power too, which was terrifying.
I'm so surprised to see Meowscarada this low. I feel like Meowscarada is just a really solid, fast pivot guy with a lot of cool options. Maybe you could enlighten me.
I would bump it up to A or A- probably. I honestly couldn't tell you why it's this low. I mean, it has a lot of really good sets. I've actually used Banded recently to a lot of success. HDB is, of course, a classic and pretty solid. Scarf is very good. It has an incredible speed tier as a Scarfer, and it got triple Axel kind of recently with
that was
a DLC move as well.
A great buff.
Yeah, so it's pretty good. It's a good Pokemon. Not sure why it's here.
Ogerpon Cornerstone is, I guess, the least popular of the Ogerpons. It's Grass Rock with a Rock-type Ivy Cudgel, which is quite cool. It's got Sturdy, so that makes it well-suited as the hazard setter compared to the other ones, because it can live the hit early, set layers, and its Terra buffs defense, which is probably not that good, but it does hit like a truck with the Rock boost. What do you think of Ogerpon Cornerstone?
Really solid breaker. It's a blast to click an accurate rock move for the first time ever. But yeah, a bit just outclassed by Wellspring. Rock is not as great when paired with grass as a water type Ivy Cudgel.
True, and you of course can't run multiple Ogerpons, so that's going to make it tough because you could always just slot in Wellspring instead.
Yeah, but it definitely does have its benefits. Being able to just crack birds is big, which Wellspring can't do, and it has the benefit of being not as prepared for. People are considering Wellspring when they build, they probably won't consider Cornerstone.
Yeah, you probably just destroy Zapdos if they're relying on that. That's great. Okidogi is here, and Okidogi surprised me. I thought this would suck when I first saw it, but it's actually pretty good. It's almost like Annihilate, but not as broken. It's a good bulk up, Drain Punch, poison fighting typing, and the guard dog ability, which prevents intimidate. And I think it buffs your attack if you get intimidated, which is really nice with Enter the Rise of Lando. It's got really good coverage options too.
Yeah, guard dog also prevents roar and whirlwind.
Oh, that's really good. Because those are pretty popular recently.
Absolutely. Yeah, so if you run it with like a especially defensive Terra Fire set with bulk up is really popular because that will completely wall Moltres, can't even roar you out, and it also is immune to Will-O-Wisp.
That's really good. What do you think about the ranking of this? This is B rank.
I'd say it's fair. It really did suck for a while and it got 0 usage, but the reason it came back into OU and the reason it stays is not only can it run some threatening bulk up sets, but it stops Darkrai in its tracks. Darkrai does get psychic moves, but it almost never uses it.
That's damn true. Rabombi's next, the former Sticky Web King. Still has its uses, I'm sure, as it one-shots many great tasks, sets webs quickly, and has stuff like Stun Spore, Shield Dust has its value sometimes. It also has Psychic Noise. I think Araquanid's a bit better, but this probably has value sometimes.
Yeah, it's very similar to Araquanid. I would say slightly worse, but it's a good web setter.
Superior's next. Superior's in an interesting spot. Has a lot of really great tools. Leaf Storm Contrary, of course. Can use Terra Stella Contrary. Probably not the best, but it's an option, a new option. Probably the best new addition for Superior is just Terra Blast to fill out its coverage that it previously lacked. With fire and ground coverage, it can actually be a damn frightening presence.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool Pokemon and definitely loves Terra Blast, a great Terra user. The problem being it is first a Terra Hog. It needs Terra to function almost every single game. And the second problem being even with Terra, it is inconsistent. There really isn't any Terra Blast type that's going to hit everything other than Stellar, which comes at the disadvantage of not really doing that much damage compared to an option like Terra Blast Fire or Ground.
That's true. It's never good to have a Pokemon that needs Terra to function, because it just hinders your flexibility so much. Unless the Pokemon gets so much out of it that it's worth. Superior, I suppose, doesn't fit that a bit.
Yeah, it's on the fence. On the fence a bit. I mean, it's definitely viable. I've used it on teams and it's worked well, but it's niche. It's definitely not something that you can throw on a team.
For sure. Slitherwing is here. Pretty good Pokemon. It's a bug fighting type with pretty decent stats and move pool. It's got first impression U-turn, close combat. Can be interesting on Sun teams. I wonder how it's being used recently. How is this being used?
Yep. Recently, mostly Assault Vest on Sun, and that's about the only place where it's used. You don't see Slithering otherwise. But with AV on Sun, I mean, it has that Photosynthesis boosted first impression, a really strong U-turn, and of course the Pokemon that would typically switch in to first impression, being those Steel types, really don't like taking close combat. And you can run Wild Charge or Flare Blitz to deal with some of the other switch-ins as well. So pretty solid Pokemon, nothing crazy, very niche, basically only fits on Sun, but it does its job well.
I should try. I've always liked this Pokemon. Maybe I'll give that a go. It has a pretty high special defense too, doesn't it?
It does indeed. Yeah, it has a very high special defense. The main, well, especially with that AV. I think it's a 105 base special defense. But yeah, it's also good on Sun just because of what it does defensively. Resisting ground, being able to switch into Great Tusk really easily is actually really nice on Sun because it can struggle with Great Tusk.
Up next is Skarmory, an old classic. Steel flying type.
It's Corv, but it sets Spike.
Yeah, and it can't U-turn, but setting hazards is maybe a little bit more valuable in this gen because of Goldengo and because Corviknight sucks at defogging. So the stuff Corviknight used to be able to do consistently isn't as consistent these days.
Yeah, it definitely, as a defogger, Corviknight is not what it used to be. I think it deserves to be ranked higher than Skarmory, which it is, just because of U-turn, but they're pretty close. Skarmory definitely still has a place in OU.
Cool to see. The old classic. Torkoal is just a pretty straightforward Sun setter. We mentioned Ninetales, and Ninetales are probably a better fit in this metagame, but Torkoal still has its value, with Rapid Spin especially being probably the biggest thing. And Stealth Rock all in one. Oh, you can't use Yawn anymore, can you? That's bad.
No, you can't, which is part of the reason Torkoal is where it is.
That's unfortunate. I love that option on Torkoal. I love the momentum it gives you.
Yeah, Yawn was a really fun tech, and it kind of gave Torkoal, as I said, it was sometimes a struggle for Torkoal to get out, and Yawn kind of gave it that way, but not anymore.
Rest in peace to Torkoal Nation. Tornadus T is here. It's kind of crazy to see it so low. I thought it would just be right back to business as usual for Tornadus T when it came back, and it would be back to like A tier or something. But it doesn't have Knock or Defog anymore, which is pretty terrible. It has Bleak Wind Storm.
It did get Knock back.
Oh, sorry,
it lost Knock, but yeah, it does have it back now.
So that's very good. So Knock U-turn, the new Bleak Wind Storm option is quite good because it's a bit more accurate than Hurricane was. Pretty consistent damage
Yeah.
output from that.
I mean, Bleak Wind Storm helped it out a little bit, but gaining 10 accuracy to lose 10 base power, it's a good trade, and I think Tornadoes should run Bleak Wind Storm, but it's still a 100 base power move with 80 accuracy, which is honestly pretty trash. Like, you think about, there are a lot of 90 base power moves with 100 accuracy. You think like the classic, the Ice Beams, Energy Ball, Psychic, Thunderbolt, Earth Power. So 100 base power with 80 accuracy is honestly pretty garbage. So the fact it is very much still struggling from not having a real flying stab.
That's true. Good flying special attacks are hard to come by. It's usually Pokemon relying on the inaccuracy of Hurricane in a lot of cases, or something with pretty low power like Air Slash. Yeah, how do you feel about Tornado's T? It seems pretty solid, like it always has been. Just a good regen Pokemon with good typing, good moves to click. It feels...
Yeah, it's decent, not a bad Pokemon at all. It's sort of just a victim of power creep and losing the ability to defog. Since it can't really defog anymore and it can't do that much damage to Goldengo, it's not what it once was.
Is it still seen on Rain for the Hurricane / Bleak Wind Storm? And that just as a bulky pivot?
Specs Hurricane on Rain is definitely a thing. Problem is Rain as a playstyle is garbage. And there's one Pokemon that made Rain garbage, and that is,
Ogerpon.
You guessed it, yeah. Ogerpon Wellspring.
This would help against that though, but yeah.
Yeah. For those of you watching, consider how many Pokemon and playstyles Ogerpon Wellspring is single-handedly invalidating.
So true. It's such a high impact Pokemon. When you look through these, it's having like such a rippling effect.
Yeah, it is number one on my ban list.
Maybe you're onto something. I don't know. The fans might get furious at more bans at this juncture.
Yeah, maybe so.
Toxapex is next. I mean, do we have to talk about Toxapex? It's got.
We don't have to talk about Toxapex.
We could move. Yeah, let's not. Yeah. It's probably okay sometimes. It lost all its options though.
The one thing I'll speak for a brief moment and just say it lost Knock, it lost Scald. That made it a lot worse on balance teams. So now you only see it on Stall because it still does its Stall role of Toxic Haze well. That's about it. Yep. You guys know what it is. We don't want to spend time talking about Toxic.
And Volcanids here. Who does this also get punished by Wellspring? Maybe not as much, but
not as much. I mean, it really would like to just be able to click Steam Eruption more freely, but you do see it. I mean, it's good defensively, Water Absorb, fantastic ability, and you see some Fire Spin taunt sets that can really take down the Stall teams well.
It's almost like a Magma Storm Heatran sort of vibe.
Yeah, it's niche but solid Pokemon.
And in the B- rank, here we are with some pretty funny guys. Now, Barraskewda's at the top, I assume just because it's a pretty solid Swift Swim abuser. It's one of the few reasons to run Rain. Has this outcompeted the other Swift Swim Pokemon? Are there any other worth noting, like on the physical side? I remember Floatzel was once a good Pokemon, probably not anymore.
Yeah, Floatzel was here before Barraskewda was added to the game, but there's not much reason to use it when Barraskewda's just better. The other one is Basculegion. You sometimes see that another Wave Crash user, but it just couldn't really compete with Barraskewda's speed, and Barraskewda, given how fast it is, can afford to run Adamant, which actually makes it in practice stronger than Basculegion. I believe it also just has a higher base attack, so unless you're clicking Wave Crash, Barraskewda is just stronger in most ways. So it's definitely the prominent Swift Swim user, and despite being the best Swift Swim user, it does deserve to be in B- or maybe even lower, just because, as I said, Rain as a play style is not great. Some people will try to go around the Ogerpon Wellspring issue. They'll run like Expert Belt, or they'll run Mystic Water with like Poison Jab or something, and it's just not very good. It's sort of like a low kick situation. You need the band, you need that choice band so it does the one thing it's good at, and but yeah, Wellspring exists, so it's just not great.
That's always been a problem with Rain, is if you face one water immune guy, it is a struggle, and it just becomes like eliminate that one guy to just click your water moves. But when the water when the water Pokemon is so popular and so solid and hard to eliminate, and it can pivot out and stuff, it becomes such an issue.
Yeah, and the other thing is, how much is it going to do to your team, right? Like if you click Liquidation into a Clodsire, like, oh no, it's kind of annoying, but nothing's going to die. Your opponent might get a Brox. You click Liquidation on a Wellspring, you are losing a Pokemon.
Yeah, it's so much momentum loss, especially if you're choiced.
And you've now given it a boost to Ivy Cudgel.
Yeah, you're buffing it. What a disaster. Blaziken's here. I thought this would be broken in Gen 9 with Terra and everything. Turned out to be pretty fine and in fact pretty bad. What do you think is gone wrong for Blaziken?
It's just not consistent enough. I think Great Tusk and Zamazenta being so high usage really took a lot of wind out of Blaziken's sails, and Landorus too. I mean, you've got Landorus, Gliscor, Zamazenta, and Tusk being such incredibly high usage Pokemon, and also a ton of really strong priority like Raging Bolt with Thunderclap, E-Speed Dragonite. So Sucker Punch Gambit even does a lot to it. So it has a really rough matchup into the top tiers, and it's not reliable enough. Yes, it can be really threatening with these SD Protect sets with Terra, but it's just not consistent enough to justify using.
Probably gets a bit owned by its own recoil too with Flare Blitz, or does it even have another good fire stamp?
Some people run Blaze Kick, 85 base power, 90 accuracy. I don't think that's worth it. I run Flare Blitz and just accept the consequences.
Yeah, it needs all the damage it can get, I imagine.
It does indeed.
Blissy's here for obvious reasons. I'm sure it's viable in every gen ever as just the special wall, and probably it's not like auto include as it once was in previous gens or anything, but it can still do special walling better than anything. That's fairly straightforward.
Yeah, it's basically a must on stall, but other than that, you never see it.
Excadrill is still holding on. It's the Sand Setter Tyranitar is suffering. It's outcompeted by Iron Treads, but it still has Sand Rush, it still has good stab, rapid spin, it still has Excadrill.
Yeah, it can work on sand teams. Sand teams aren't particularly good, since Hippowdon and Tyranitar are not great, but it can work. You can run some hilarious SD Mold Breaker Terra Blast sets and destroy stall teams, but it's terrible at that too. I mean, it'll beat the stall team, but then you'll be, why do I have an Excadrill against every other type of team style?
Feels like there's a lot of threats that could destroy stall teams.
Yeah, stall's having a rough generation.
Garchomp is lower than it's ever been at B-, which is quite a thing to see. But it makes a lot of sense. It just gets outcompeted by all the other bulky grounds. It still perhaps has value with its rough skin, Rocky Helmet stacking, Dragon Tails shuffling. That was still the thing that it was doing to cling onto OU for a bit. These days, I don't know how good that even is. Even Landorus T is doing the Rocky Helmet thing a little bit more consistently with its defensive profile.
Yeah. Well, they did give Garchomp spikes, so that's the big thing that it can do, is it can set rock, spikes, and phase Pokemon out with Dragon Tail. And I think it's fairly good at doing that. I would give it B, maybe even B+. I feel like this B- is a little bit of an insult. I mean, Rough Skin Rocky Helmet is still good, and being able to set double hazards is still really good, and its typing is, of course, fantastic, and it's got great stats. So it's definitely not what it once was, and it's far from the best or second or even third best ground type in the tier, but it can work really well as a dual hazard setter, even better than Ting-Lu often on those more offensive builds that appreciate the chip Rocky Helmet can provide.
True. Garchomp is more worthwhile than we thought, folks. It's not all bad. Heatran is here, another mainstay ranked very low. Do you agree with this one? Heatran does feel like it's really struggling. It dies to Ogerpon, that's something.
Yeah, Heatran I think is really rough. It probably deserves B-, maybe even C. It's just not a very good Pokemon. It can only run Magma Storm sets now. They took away Toxic, which was a huge loss for Heatran. Toxic enabled a lot of its more defensive sets, but now that it doesn't have that anymore, the only thing it can really do is run those Magma Storm taunt variants, and those are heavily reliant on Terra because there are so many good ground types in the tier. You really do need Terra Blast Grass to actually break anything. So it ends up being a Terra reliant Pokemon that needs to hit a 70 accuracy move to make any progress.
Unfortunately, a pretty inconsistent choice these days. Unfortunately, folks. I love Heatran, but it does feel like a terrible gen for it for sure. Iron Boulder's next. What do you think of Iron Boulder? It's a Rock Psychic, which is pretty bad typing. It can be extremely fast with booster energy. It's got the great move Mighty Cleave, which is an accurate rock move that bypasses Protect. Very good move. And it's got pretty solid physical coverage. I think it can work on HO, but it's got some competition for sure.
Yeah, as you said, can work on HO, and it is the fastest Pokemon that gets Quark Drive or Photosynthesis, which means something, but not really worth using for the most part. I'd actually probably put this thing in C. There are so many fantastic Pokemon you can put on an HO team. To use one of those slots on Iron Boulder, not really a great choice, but it can run swords dance sets with some level of success. But because of Kingambit being as common as it is and Raging Bolt, you really do need to run substitute. So you run sub SD Mighty Cleave, and then you're left with the last slot where you want to run Earthquake, Close Combat, and Zen Headbutt, but you cannot run all those moves. So you're left with a really inconsistent, frail Pokemon.
Yeah. I think if you want this all-in cleaner Pokemon like this, Iron Valiant is just so much better. It offers so much more.
Yeah, Iron Valiant, Iron Moth, there are just better Pokemon that do the same thing.
Iron Hands is also up next. I feel like this Pokemon's okay. It is definitely suffering from its low speed and lack of any like priority to make up for that, but can be an alright bulky sweeper. Perhaps? What's your impression of Iron Hands in the meta? What's it doing?
Well, yeah, it's not terrific by any means. I would say it's underrated though. I'd put this B, maybe B plus. It has a lot of cool sets. It can run. You sometimes see citrus. You see shuckaberry is a common lumberry. I've even seen some punch and glove variants. It can run band with some success. It has assault vest is another classic set on Iron Hands. Fantastic coverage, and also one of the very few Pokemon that can comfortably switch into Kingambit, which is kind of its claim to fame. So really good coverage, plus being able to switch in on Kingambit. Overall, it's a solid Pokemon. Whichever set you run, it consistently just tanks hits, not for very long, but tanks hits and threatens your opponent with coverage. Whether it's AV or Swords Dance, that's what it's doing. It's ice punching, earthquaking, close combating, and it does it well.
I think I'd agree that it's probably a little bit better than some of these other Pokemon here, especially Iron
Yeah, to have
Boulder.
Iron Hands right next to like Excadrill and Iron Boulder, that's just rude to our boy Iron Hands.
Latias is here. Do you think? I feel like my instinct tells me that Latias is a bit more desirable than Latios because of its bulk. Maybe as a Carmine stored power Pokemon, it's a bit better, and Healing Wish is good. What do you agree? Or
I would say I would be inclined to say Latios is a little bit better just because of that addition of Luster Purge. I think they gave. I don't know if I think they maybe gave Latias. Yeah, they buffed its signature, which I think is Mist Ball, and like has a chance to lower the opponent's special attack, which is completely useless. So Latios having Luster Purge and being able to use Soul Dew and Choice Specs better and just be more immediately threatening with that special attack, I would say Latios is a little better. Latias Scarf Healing Wish sets are kind of terrible because it can't trick, because it happens to get walled hard by Goldengo.
oh, true, that's rough.
is kind of tough. So if you want to run a Scarf Healing Wish Pokemon, you're almost always going to go with Enamorus, never Latias.
Yeah.
Now, as for this kind of Calm Mind stored power set you're referring to, yes, in that regard, Latias is better than Latios, but those sets are sort of terrible. I managed to hit rank 1 with it when Latias was still a new edition, but now that phase is over, people know what it does. They know it has Aura Sphere. They're not running Rain anymore, and farming Rain was one of the big things that set did. So nowadays, you kind of your opponent will just know what to do. They'll go into their Tinglu. They'll hit you with Encore. They'll go for Roar. And meta has really worked against it. So even though it is better with those stored power sets are just not what they used to be.
Yeah, fair assessment. And it is getting outclassed even in the Healing Wish role from an Emerus, who's a bit better. Pelipper's next. It's the Rain setter, and Rain isn't that good, so this is probably fair.
Yeah, not much to say. I mean, a ranking of Pelipper is a ranking of Rain.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
Rain is terrible for one reason.
At least Pelipper could Hurricane, but that probably doesn't come up that often, and you get destroyed by grass.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it can Hurricane, like it beats Wellspring 1v1, but just Pelipper as its position as a Rain user on.
Yeah.
I guess it represents a play style, and that play style suffers. But I will say Specs Pelipper, I have seen it run on Trick Room with success by Storm Zone.
Oh, I love Specs Pelipper. That's an awesome set.
Specs Pelly on TR is probably the one viable place it has. I tried running Specs Pelipper out of TR with like a banded Barraskewda, like just a semi-Rain team, and it didn't go very well. Pelipper just did not pull its weight, so I feel like you need that Trick Room support, but
that's an interesting idea to go in a mini Rain with like Specs Pelipper and just one Rain abuser.
Yeah, it worked well back in Gen 8, but not so well in Gen 9. Barraskewda's just not good enough.
I had a team like that in Gen 7 with Pelipper and Crawdaunt as just a little breaker package.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
I wonder if is there some Rain threat that would be good into Wellspring that would benefit for Raid?
I mean, sadly not, right? I mean, there's one that doesn't so much mind Wellspring, which is Overquill, but that needs the full turns of Rain to really take advantage.
True. Oh, that's a cool Pokemon. Rotom Wash is next. This is tragic to see Rotom Wash so low. This was so solid in the early meta as the Great Tusk switch in, and just a really good pivot with Wisp. Is it bad into Wellspring as well? It's not that bad. I could Wisp it as it comes in at least.
No, this one, it's not all Wellspring's fault. It's almost all Wellspring's fault, but not entirely. This one, I think, has to do with the meta just becoming more offensive. I mean, I think it's a little underrated. I'd probably put Rotom at B. I wouldn't put it at B minus. But yeah, I mean, it's complete setup fodder for Raging Bolt, which is not great. A lot of Pokemon in the tier can actually hit it super effectively. It used to be kind of offensive grass types were rare, but now we have Ogerpon Wellspring, we have Ogerpon Regular, we have Meowscarada. So suddenly there are these Pokemon that can hit it with grass type moves that weren't really there before. But it is still good. I mean, it can still outspeed and wisp Kingambit. It's still a really good Tusk switch in. It can threaten a lot of ground types with Hydro Pump. It's definitely not as bad as this VR places it, but definitely the more offensive metagame has not been kind to it. Its base HP, I believe, is 50, so even though its defenses are pretty good, it's not really a great wall in that metagame of higher base stat totals and booster energies everywhere.
True. Skeledirge up next. Another one that was great early meta that has fallen off quite a bit, but I think it's a very good Pokemon still. I guess it's just a bit passive. At least this can like ramp itself with Torch Song, and that goes through sub. Like Torch Song is such an amazing move, and it's a pretty unique unaware wall. It is a bit of a Terra Hog, a term you used a moment ago, because it sort of needs to Terra to walls things with unaware. Its typing is very vulnerable to common physical attacking types like Earthquake, Knock, etc.
Yeah, I mean, well put. I'd probably put this a little bit higher. I don't think it's quite this bad. Torch Song, still a very threatening move, but yeah, once again, I mean, its stats are good, but its bulk is nothing crazy, and a lot of the common setup Pokemon in the tier do threaten it, so it needs to use Terra. I mean, you pretty much covered all the bases. It's good, but it's not great, and it's also not a really popular unaware option for stall teams, which is a bit rough as well. So the kind of teams that would want to use Skeledirge are those more balanced, bulky balanced playstyles, and as I've been explaining, those are really out of style right now.
Yeah, this was also damn good when Volk was around, because this destroys Volk unless it has Terra Blast Ground. It was a very important member of the meta back then, but Volk is of course
yeah, very
now.
true. And you could just respond to the Volcarona's Terra Ground with your own Terra, which made it great. And of course, it could deal with Magearna too when that was a threat. So it definitely had its time in the sun, but it's unfortunately just going through a bit of a rough patch right now. But if we do see some bans happen, which I'm not optimistic about, it seems like the player base is fairly content to kind of let the meta be a little bit wild, which is an okay choice, but it's looking like there will not be probably another time of glory for Skeledirge.
That's right. I think it's still good in Ubers, so there it has that. Tar is next. Tar is one of my favorite Pokemon of all time. It's the GOAT, and it's really dropped off. Zamazenta exists, which is a tragedy. It doesn't have Pursuit. That's old news, but even beyond that, it just isn't a great fit anymore. Its incredible natural bulk it used to have from getting special defense boosted in the sand, I don't know if that is enough to give it the longevity it wants. It's suffering from its typing. It still has, I mean, it has Knock now. That's really good. It can be an okay rock setter. I've tried Tar a little bit in Gen 9. I like it. I mean, it's cool to enable Excadrill, who is actually quite nice with Sound Rush. The Sand Chip actually comes up a lot. You can put Boots on Tar, and it can wall, like, Specs Dragapult and stuff. I don't know. I'm kind of copiuming with Tyranitar.
Yeah, I mean, it's not terrible. I did run Boots, Tar, plus Excadrill on a Sand team and got rank 1 with it. So it's not unusable, but it's not good. It almost never works. Knockoff isn't enough to justify using it. It loses to all the top tiers. There are, I mean, Great Tusk, Kingambit, Zamazenta, Landorus, Gliscor, like all these things just destroy it. Wellspring obviously destroys it. I mean, I'm not saying that, I'm not blaming T-Tar being bad on Wellspring. I just want to clarify that. T-Tar is bad for a million reasons.
Yeah.
It's just, it's weak to so much. And
it can lure Gliscor with Ice Beam though, and that's fun.
Yeah, I love watching Gliscor take 50 from my Ice Beam. It really, T-Tar's like, hey, I showed you, Gliscor. Eat this, damn it.
Yeah,
it'll take you like
heals.
3 turns to heal this off, but you'll remember me.
Oh man, that's tragic.
Yeah, you need like modest specs to kill a Gliscor, and that set is terrible, but it can cheese.
But then you Terra
Fly, and then
you Terra Fly, and then you're immune to Earthquake. Did you think of that, Gliscor?
Oh yeah, no, yeah, Specs T-Tar. It's probably the best way to cheese somebody if they don't know your team, but if they know your Specs T-Tar, it will instantly become a terrible set, and they'll figure out after 1 turn. So you better make the most of that Ice Beam.
What a tragedy for Tar. It's mad against so many things. It's so sad. Up next is Venusaur, though, who is probably a pretty okay Sun Abuser. It's got some competition now with like Hisui and Lilligant as a potential Chlorophyll guy. And of course, all the Photosynthesis mons.
Yeah, I think Venusaur has kind of won the battle against Hisui and Lilligant for the Chlorophyll user. It is pretty good at what it does, but I would say not typically worth a spot on Sun. I think there are better Pokemon to fill that role.
Yeah, I mean, it probably gets pretty easily walled, I imagine. as well.
Yeah, well, it does have, so it'll run growth and Giga Drain all the time, and then it's for its last two, it'll run Weather Ball almost all the time as well. But then it kind of has to decide between Earth Power and Sludge Bomb for last. But it is a fairly threatening set. I mean, with Weather Ball and Sun and like Life Orb and with that growth boost, it's not easy to wall. But there are so many things that can stop it. I mean, you've got Kingambit Sucker Punch, which is easily killing after a minimal chip. Dragonite E-Speed as well. And Dragonite in general can switch into it fairly easily, and it struggles to hit a lot of the dragons in the tier. It even struggling to hit Pult, which is obviously not fun at all.
True. Amoonguss is still ranked despite losing Spore. This is the C+ rank now. This happened in Gen 5 too. They banned Sleep in Gen 5. But Amoonguss still sometimes sees use because it's a decent regen Pokemon. It's pretty damn limited though. It has Stun Spore. Grass Poison typing is a bit unique, and it has like Clear Smog, but it's not very good. But you know, regen could still be alright.
Yeah, it's fine. I think really one of the only reasons you see it ever is because it's supposedly solid against Ogerpon Wellspring, but it actually loses to SD, Terra Water, Ivy Cudgel. So it kind of beats Wellspring. It'll beat most Wellspring sets, and unless, because I think Swords Dance is on less than half, so it'll beat most Wellspring, and it does have to Terra to get past you, so definitely not a bad Pokemon. You know, it can run Toxic, Foul Play, Giga Drain, Sludge Bomb, Stun Spore. It still has some good options even without Spore, but it wasn't great with Spore, and yeah, it's just not a fantastic Pokemon.
What do you think of Ceruledge? This Pokemon was having a real moment early on with the Terra Bug Flash Fire set, which was almost like another Annihilate with Bitter Blade as a fire-type draining move. That was a really fun set, but that's probably extinct now, I imagine. It can still do stuff with weak armor, I bet, and its Fire Ghost is a great offensive profile. Bitter Blade's a great move. It's got Poltergeist now. What do you think of Ceruledge?
Well, it's a very inconsistent Pokemon, and it deserves to fall off, and I think the fact that it has just shows that the metagame has progressed. If you want to use Ceruledge, the best way to do so is Sash SD with Sneak, Close Combat, and Bitter Blade. Running Poltergeist is kind of a rude term for it would be noob trap. I'd say inexperienced player trap, maybe, because the problem with Poltergeist is there are so many Pokemon with booster energy in the tier, and they happen to be really good at taking Bitter Blade. So if you have like a Walking Wake,
oh yeah, that's true.
It's like, oh, you can't hit it with Poltergeist. A Raging Bolt, oh, you can't hit it with Poltergeist. So run CC so you actually have a decent stab move that can hit things that Bitter Blade can't. But yeah, it's not great. It can still be run. Weak Armor SD is not terrible, but it's not a very good Pokemon.
That's a fair assessment. I mean, even back in the day when it was having its flavor of the month, I didn't think it was that good either. It's very all in and reasonably easy to stop. It's not that fast either.
No, yeah, people figured out Poltergeist didn't work pretty fast.
That too, yeah. Cresselia's next. I recall this having some usage with a Terra Poison stored power set, and it perhaps has value with its Trick Room setting. Probably there's better options. It has Healing Wish as well. Is Cresselia doing much?
Well, yeah, as you said, that Levitate, Calm Mind, Stored Power, Moonblast, Moonlight set, it definitely did have its time being really threatening. Problem with that is Encore. Encore is now such a common move, and if you experience that, your Cresselia is now completely useless. So that's why you don't really see that Cresselia much anymore. That is still a threatening set, but if you're going to run a set like that on kind of a more balanced or even like bulky offense kind of build, you know, you better hope that that's a very consistent Pokemon. And if you think about the sweepers that have found their way onto balance in the past, it's things like Curse Garganacl, things like Volcarona that are either so broken or they do other things, like in Garganacl's case, just clicking Salt Cure. When you have this Cresselia that's inconsistent and does nothing outside of sweeping, it's hard to justify using, which is why it's fallen off. Now, it does have other roles that you mentioned, like, you sometimes see Lunar Dance trick sets on HO, like Trick Scarf. You see Trick Room variants. It's I would say a staple, almost a mandatory Pokemon on Trick Room, but not particularly. It does that role well, but it's on a bad play style automatically because it's Trick Room. So kind of like Pelipper. Yes, Pelipper is great on Rain, but Rain sucks. Yes, Cresselia is great on Trick Room, but Trick Room sucks.
Very fair. Lunar Dance is the same thing as Healing Wish, isn't it?
I actually recently messed this up and was devastated devastated by the mistake I made. Lunar Dance is better, which can sometimes make it worse because it heals PP up as well. Meaning, if a Pokemon is at full health and you Lunar Dance into it, it will heal it because it will use up the Lunar Dance to restore its PP.
Right, yeah.
So make sure you don't make that mistake like I did.
Like you can spend it when you don't want to. That's interesting. That's an important. That's going to save my life in the future. Thank you. Adamorous Theriads here. I feel like this stinks, but it's a Trick Room Abuser. It's got a good typing. It's bulky. It's got all the same options as regular Enamorous, but it's more defensive. You've probably used it, haven't you?
Yeah, I've tried it on some screens builds. It's sometimes seen on using Quick Claw as well. Generally, regular Enamorous is better because of the speed, but this thing does have pretty decent bulk, so you can run some Draining Kiss Calm Mind sets with it that can be quite effective. Yeah, it's basically just a worse Enamorous, but it does some things better, and it can be pretty scary on screens, although it is, as a setup sweeper, very unreliable, kind of similar to Cresselia. If it doesn't sweep, it's doing nothing, and it's stopped in its tracks by Encore.
Fair enough. Fizandipity. I've actually been impressed with this Pokemon. I think it's a pretty good defensive pivot. Poison Fairy is a cool typing. It has healing. It can spread Toxic while clicking its moves, and it can U-turn pretty well, and it's got good special defense. It's a pretty nice Iron Valiant switch in and other things. My immediate thought is that this might be a bit low because I think it's actually quite a good Pokemon. What do you think of Fezandipity?
I'm going to have to disagree with you on this one. I think it's good right where it is. I mean, you said it walls Iron Valiant and things, and my question would be, what are those and things? That's the problem. It walls Iron Valiant, and that's just about all it's good for. I mean, it in theory walls Zamazenta, but sub-ID sets are beating it, so it doesn't do that reliably. Yeah, so it can't break. It does very little damage with Play Rough. Hard walled by really any poison type. A lot of common Pokemon in the tier switch in and just use it as setup fodder. Like Kingambit, it gets just Future Sight and Chillied on by Glow King. Being able to poison something with U-turn and wall Ival is nice, but it does just that. It poisons things with U-turn, and there's Gliscor as well, which of course is already poisoned. Goldengo doesn't care. It gets walled by so many top tiers, and on defensively walls Ival, and that's it.
True. You've owned me with logic here.
I will say there's one, I did see it used as kind of a bulky pivot on Sun, I believe by Langloy, and that it managed to get a pretty high rank there. So maybe I'm wrong about Fezan, but as for my personal experience with it, it's not particularly great.
But that sounds pretty fair to me. I think you made some good points. You do have to output more pressure as a Pokemon like this in this day and age. It does sound like it gets punished by a lot of common stuff. Hisuian Gudra is one that you're very familiar with. A famous team of yours, I think #1 with this. It wasn't a previous meta, but still.
Yeah, it did get one cool new buff, which is Knockoff, which definitely helps the Assault Vest sets out a bit. I would say it might still be viable, but that's a big maybe. But it is a cool Pokemon. It does switch into Wellspring kind of well, which is sort of nice. And yeah, Knockoff AV sets with Draco Meteor plus Flash Cannon to hit fairies. It is pretty cool.
I love it personally. Steel Dragon, such a satisfying typing.
If it could run 8 moves, it would be a top tier. But alas, it must just run those 4.
Hydreigon next. Hydreigon is one of my favorite Pokemon ever. Love it. But yeah, this is probably about right. You don't see it too often. It had a pretty cool rise early. There was like a sub sweeper set that was running around that was pretty interesting. And I think just as a special attacking rock setter, because it has rocks now, people were using it. But perhaps just some new toy syndrome there.
Yeah, the rocks leads are okay, but there are better options. And as for the Nasty Plot variants, probably the best set is just Nasty Plot 3 attacks. Having Levitate plus Terra Steel or Poison is obviously still fantastic, but yeah, it just didn't age particularly well. There are a lot of other sweepers with better stats that are stronger and do what Hydreigon does better.
It's true. It's all true.
I mean, like Darkrai being the main one. I find it very difficult to justify using Hydreigon when Darkrai exists.
Yeah, it's so much faster. Hydreigon's not that fast by modern standards at all.
Yeah.
Well, Levitate is something that does have going for it, and it gets U-turn, which might be something. You mentioned Nasty Plot 3 attacks is the popular set, but yeah.
Like, U-turn is a great move on a lot of Pokemon, but Hydreigon is just so bad as a user of Scarf or Specs that it doesn't end up being helpful for it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Como-O is next. Another Pokemon I love on the flavor side. So cool. It's got the Clangorous Soul Boost set. It's got maybe Belly Drum. That was a set once. Probably not anymore. Is Como-O doing anything? It probably just sucks. I feel like it's too slow and it takes too long to ramp up.
I mean, it's doing what it always does. Defensive sets are completely dead because Great Tusk exists, so there's no reason to run a defensive Como. And the offensive sets are super inconsistent. It does have that Clangorous Soul Omni Boost move that for losing a third of its health. So it's not terrible, but there are so many great sweepers.
Yeah, it's just outclassed by other similar offensive powerhouses and boost sweepers. Hisuian Lilligant is a new option as a physical attacker in the sun. Pretty cool one. Grass fighting, stab close combat, solar blade. It is pretty bad on the stats side though, and it can't sleep powder anymore. But it's probably alright sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's got some cool utility moves. It actually has Healing Wish, which most people don't know about, so that's kind of a fun one. It has Encore, which is cool. Most Chlorophyll sets will opt to run Swords Dance, but it does have Victory Dance as well. So you could run like a Victory Dance Synthesis set on it with like that advanced healing. It got Triple Axle at the same time Meowscarada did, so that's fun as well. Definitely a viable Pokemon on Sun, but not fantastic.
We got Galarian Moltres next, who is UUBL ranked. It's an alright agility sweeper perhaps, weakness policy. I don't even know if you would run weakness policy. It has Berserk, which is, I believe, when you're half health, you get 1 special attack boost, which is kind of good. It's bulky enough to take advantage of that. And Dark special attackers are good. I imagine it's getting outclassed by like Darkrai though.
Yeah, big time. I mean, the other thing about Berserk is that it has to be by an opponent attack. So if you get brought down to that health by a status condition like Wisp or something, or Toxic, or if you substitute yourself into that range, you don't get the boost, which is a huge problem for Moltres, Galarian Moltres. And also, its 2 stabs are resisted by Kingambit, which is awful too. So this is a Pokemon that's weak to a ton of priority, most notably Raging Bolt. It's, weak to Weavile Ice Shard. It doesn't take E-Speed from D-Knight very well. It gets completely farmed by Ting Lu. It can't touch Kingambit. Overall, it is an extraordinarily inconsistent Pokemon, and I would say C+ is honestly too high for it. I'd probably put it in C-. Really just a rough generation. I'm a huge Galarian Moltres fan, and I loved using it in Generation 8, but the power level, the difficulty it has setting up, and how you can give it every opportunity in the world and it will still do nothing. It's a really bad Pokemon.
That does sound bad. That Berserk interaction. I can't believe I'm not aware of that. That's really regrettable.
Yeah, if it could substitute, I think it would absolutely have some usage. I mean, I would happily run like a substitute Protect set with Fiery Wrath and Terra Blast. That would be a lot of fun. I think like probably Terra Blast Fairy, because you could kind of wish it up maybe with Olo or something, or pair it with a Healing Wish Pokemon and keep giving yourself boost with well-timed substitutes with your leftovers. That would be super fun, but alas, you need to be hit directly. So Berserk is a much worse ability than it initially appears.
And then Reuniclus has snuck its way onto the ranking, a Pokemon that recently got suspected in Gen 5. Didn't end up getting banned, but it's one of the most strong, powerful Pokemon there. But of course, it's suffered over the years from Dark and Ghost types rising so much. It's still got some really good traits though. Magic Guard is just an elite ability, and it's got really good bulk, recovery, great offensive move pool, and even access to Trick Room to give it some offensive output, turning its low speed into an advantage. Maybe, is that why people are using it in Gen 9? That probably is a decent late game cleaner.
That's exactly right. So Reuniclus in Gen 9 is going to be running Trick Room with Life Orb Magic Guard. So that's a fun thing you can do with Magic Guard, is run Life Orb, so you get the boost but don't take the recoil. And you're going to run Focus Blast, Shadow Ball, Trick Room, and then Psyshock, Psychic, or Psychic Noise for your last. I'm personally a Psychic Noise guy, and you can pair it with other slow Pokemon, because we have a real lack of Pokemon in Gen 9 that can set Trick Room and abuse it, and Reuniclus does that well. So that's kind of its one niche. Calm Mind sets are almost never seen. It's sort of just a worse Clefable in that regard. It's weak to too much. It really heavily relies on Terra, and it doesn't have the coverage to cover the threats it needs to.
Interesting as a self-sufficient Trick Room Pokemon though. Like you said, there's not that many of those. It probably still suffers. Weakness to Sucker Punch is pretty damning these days. Can it live one Sucker Punch? I don't even know if it can.
I think from full, I believe yes.
I guess it depends what the Supreme Overlord's out there.
Yeah, if there are more Supreme Overlords, there's no way you're living it.
Sucks being a Psychic type these days. It's sad to see. Anyway, C rank, good old C rank. Chansey's at the top. Probably it's a, Blissey, but it can run an Eviolite, and it's got slightly worse stats. You probably want Blissey because it boots, though. Like, Eviolite probably isn't as worth.
Yeah, some teams still prefer Chansey if you happen to have one of those builds that has really solid hazard control, but stalls mostly these days just ignore it, especially when you've got a Pokemon like Gliscor that can take knockoffs for years. Not much of a point to have a stall that's heavily focused on removing hazards.
Comfy is here, and this is one I talked about in the video that I was surprised to see here, and I thought was really cool. It's a Mono Fairy. It's got bad stats, but it's interesting because it has the ability Triage, which is incredible. +3 prio on healing-based moves, which includes Draining Kiss. So you can have a prio Draining Kiss that's even out-prioing like extreme speed and stuff because it's +3. Really interesting sweeper, and I've seen it with Grassy Seed, Carmine. It also gets stored power, doesn't it? Yeah, that's
It does. Yeah,
really
it's
cool.
got a lot of cool options. It'll always run Carmine and Draining Kiss. Those are the two moves you can count on every time, unless it's on Sun, at which point it'll run Growth instead of Carmine, so it can boost up faster.
That's very cool.
But you'll either see it running Carmine and then some Carmine D-Kiss and some combination of Synthesis, Terra Blast, Stored Power, Taunt, stuff like that. It's got a lot of really scary options there, usually with either an offensive Terra type like Ground to hit the Pokemon it struggles with its typical coverage, or it'll be a Terra like Poison or Steel, so it can't be toxic if it's usually on a Synthesis variant. And as I said, there is a Life Orb set on Sun, which will run Growth to immediately boost up to +2, and that set will usually run Draining Kiss, Terra Blast, and Giga Drain with Growth, and that's a really fun one as well.
So cool. Such a unique effect it has. It's, of course, very hard to fit on teams, probably. Very niche, but...
Oh yeah, extremely niche, but I would say viable, and a lot of Pokemon in C rank are kind of like that. Very, very niche, but viable.
Is Grimmsnarl next? And I think you're pretty fond of Grimmsnarl. From what you've said so far, and I've also seen you use it a few times. It's a screen setter with Prankster. It's even pretty nice offensively. Dark Fairy being pretty threatening. It's got Spirit Break, which is a great attack. And it has Parting Shot with priority, which is very, very good. That can enable things in a similar way to screens where you're just nerfing the thing in front of you, pivoting to a threat, and then getting a sit-up opportunity.
I'm a fan of Choice Band Trick Parting Shot sets and of the typical screens variants. I'd say it's probably the best screen setter in the tier. It's not a great Pokemon, it's very niche, and screens in general is not a very good playstyle, but it can work.
It does suffer from Goldango and also Ting-Lu because dark types are immune to Prankster, but...
Yeah, definitely, especially Goldango with that immunity to Parting Shot is a little bit rough, but it is still a fantastic move.
Mamoswine's here, which I love to see. This is another one of my favorite Pokemon ever. Great offensive typing. Ice Ground was an absolute monster back in Gen 5. My favorite Pokemon to use in that format. In the modern day, I assume it's doing a similar thing. It's obviously way worse relatively to everything else, but just Ice Ground Stab, and like it's still got Ice Shard. I imagine it's still okay. C rank seems alright.
It's kind of like Weavile, but worse in most ways and better in a few. And that's kind of the nice thing about it. If you can afford to put a slow Pokemon on your team, Mamoswine is better on Hazard Stack, so I've run it on Boots with H Stack. Reason being, it's got that higher attack in Weavile and that stronger stab move in EQ. So whereas a Boots Weavile struggle to pressure something like Alomomola or a struggle with Clefable, Mamoswine can actually do enough damage to threaten those Pokemon because it has Earthquake. And of course, the slightly stronger Ice Shard is nice, and there are some rare benefits to Thick Fat as well. Like you can kind of take a hit from an Iron Moth, which is nice too, especially with Terra and Thick Fat. You can sometimes surprise your opponent to take a hit very well. Generally, it's outclassed by Weavile, but it's still valuable. Ice is still a fantastic offensive type.
I bet it's like decent to Raging Bolt too. You get hit by Draco Meteor, but you're at least immune to Thunderclap.
Yes,
cool.
That's very good point as well, being better against Raging Bolt than Weavile. And it also sets rocks, of course, so there is that too. It can be kind of put on a team and do a lot of different things at once.
Sounds pretty good to me. Mandibuzz is here, who is a pretty cool defensive utility Pokemon I've always enjoyed using when it comes up. C rank's probably about right though. It's very frail for Gen 9. It does still have Defog. It's okay at threatening Goldango compared to other Defoggers. Like it's got Knockoff, which at least hits it once really hard and gets rid of its item. It has Foul Play, which is usually quite nice to have. It's got U-Turn, which is really good, and Overcoat's kind of useless now because there's no sleep, but that was once something.
Yeah, I'd probably put Mandibuzz a little higher, maybe C+, maybe even B-. The one thing it can do well is it has a decent amount of speed, so it can outpace Kingambit, and the best sets of Mandibuzz, every Mandibuzz should be running Iron Defense plus Foul Play. And that's good for a few things. It can hard wall Kingambit. So like an Iron Defense Foul Play Mandibuzz is one of the few Pokemon that can stop absolutely every single set of Kingambit, which is really nice. But it can also stop Roaring Moon. It can stop Dragonite that don't have Encore. And it can actually switch into Wellspring hits fairly well. And I believe it does kill Wellspring if the Wellspring sets up 1 SD. So overall, I think probably a little bit underrated. And it gets Toxic. That's the other thing. It's one of the very few Pokemon that retained Toxic after the Purge. That's
such a cool way to deal with Visit threats. Just like Iron Defensing into them and Foul Playing them, threatening them if they choose to try to boost. I love that. That's such a cool... It's like almost like Haze, but in a roundabout way.
Yeah, the problem with that set, of course, being it's really passive and literally does that. Like, it'll stop physical sweepers like nobody's business, and it will do nothing else for you.
Right, yeah. But that has quite a lot of application, to be honest, in this meta. Like, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it definitely does. It is pretty good, but yeah, it's got a very narrow role, but it performs that role incredibly well.
I love mouse hold. I think it's awesome. I've used it a lot just because I think it's fun. It's probably, I might even put it lower than this though. Tidy up's really good. Encore's really good. Population bomb can be really good, but that's very, very punishable. And its only other coverage is like bite, which actually is all right with technician and tidy up boosts. It can hit ghosts. But it's so one-dimensional, so obvious what it wants to do. But at least it can get rid of hazards consistently, which is probably the main thing that gives it utility. Like, that's pretty damn powerful. Even if you just tidy up once, it can do its job and enable teammates. What do you think of mouse hold?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I'd say actually I'd probably put it in C+. I think it's pretty solid. Population bomb with technician is obviously an insanely powerful nuke. One of the strongest moves from a non-choice Pokemon in the generation. It's limited a little bit because it has to run wide lens to function well. With wide lens, population bomb has, I believe, about a 90% chance to get all 10 hits. Bite, after that technician boost, turning into a 90 base power dark move with that 30% flinch chance is not bad at all. Gets Encore too, and a really nice speed tier, hitting 353. So honestly, it's a really good Pokemon. I mean, it's limited by its lack of ability to hit ghost types, but overall, I think it's actually quite strong, and the utility of Tidy Up being able to remove hazards is so valuable to some teams. Like, I've used it a few times on screens to a lot of success, and it fits on some kind of random offensive builds as well. I'm a big fan, and I think it's a little underrated.
Let's go. I'm glad to hear that. It does have good utility. Tidy Up, even removing subs, is pretty cool. Good sub is pretty common. And
yeah,
such
and
a
also
fun
there's
Pokemon.
some like rare play styles that can actually run through almost completely. Like, you can lead mouse hold on some Glamora and just click Tidy Up turn 1, and you just become this terrifying monster that might just sweep the entire team.
Against certain HO, I imagine.
Yes,
They don't
yeah.
have a good switch
Certain
in.
HO and offense teams, they almost never have a Rocky Helmet Pokemon. And also you can pair it with knockoff users to make it less likely that it just gets trashed by Rocky Helmet.
Yeah, that's one of my viewers, Vic Boss, likes to build with mouse hold. It's usually paired with some consistent, a knockoff Pokemon that lures in like a Corviknight Lando, so it can enable mouse hold to just... mouse hold can actually end up powering through Corviknight sometimes if it's got its Rocky Helmet knocked off and rocks are up and stuff, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is hilariously entertaining. And if the Corviknight tries to Iron Defense, of course, or even Roost once, there you go, Encore, and then you just tidy up more.
Yeah. Overquill I love as well. Dark Poison's such a good typing, and it's such an interesting Swift Swim Pokemon, so unique. It's got like Spikes, Destiny Bond, Liquidation for Rain move, but it also hits Wellspring, unlike other ones, because it's got Poison Stab. But, you know, Rain does suck. Do you think it has any application outside of Rain? Probably not.
To be honest, I haven't tried it outside of Rain. I wouldn't be very optimistic. I would have to check, I'll type it in right now and check if this thing gets Thunder Wave, because the only thing I could really see it doing is being a Spike setter that can switch into Darkrai and Thunder Wave it, because being a Darkrai switch in is valuable. But given how common Terra Poison Darkrai is, and sadly it does not get T-Wave, so I'm just looking at it, it can't really do anything other than click Toxic and Spikes, and it does get Bar Barrage with a 50% chance to poison, which is a 60 base power move that's double power if the target's already poisoned, so that's pretty nice. But even with Dark Poison being a good typing and Intimidate being a great defensive type, I just don't think it does enough into the tier. There are too many things that hard wall it. I mean, you've got King Gambit, which uses it as setup fodder. You've got Gliscor, which completely abuses it. Great Tusk is pretty good into it as well. It might be something I'd try at some time, but I think its lack of knockoff is kind of the last nail in the coffin for Overquill.
It's true, and there's like a Alolan Muck gets knockoff at least. That's pretty bad too, but probably as like an AV defensive Pokemon, you'd rather have that.
Yeah, especially with Rillaboom in the tier pairing very well with that. I would much rather run Alolan Muck, and I'm honestly surprised we haven't seen Alolan Muck yet.
I don't think it's ranked here, is it? It might be ranked lower. I don't remember seeing it.
The one thing Overquill does well, I'd say it's second to Barraskewda, maybe even tied with Barraskewda as the best Swift Swim user, which, as I said, doesn't count for much because Rain sucks, but it is in a kind of a unique position where it deals with Wellspring well and also takes Grassy Glide, which is pretty cool.
True, yeah. And then there's Thunderous Theory, and a Pokemon you have used with Terra Blast Flying as just a really good neutral attacker, and it's a straightforward Pokemon, high special attack, I think base 145, which is crazy. Great pivot, Volt Switch user, can switch in on Tusk pretty well and threaten it with Grass Knot, and of course Terra Blast Flying.
Yeah, I mean, it's frail enough that it will die to Tusk Rapid Spin into Ice Spinner, which is not great, but it's, as a Specs user, it's not really viable anymore. It still destroys fat teams, but as I said, fat teams are not very good right now.
Yeah.
Raging Bolt existing is a huge problem for it, although you can run Terra Fairy and Hardwall Raging Bolt, which is pretty silly, but overall it's just not a great Pokemon. There are better options. I've been experimenting a little bit with Choice Scarf sets, but I would say it's probably unviable.
Yeah, Raging Bolt, not only do you match up pretty poorly against it, it's probably doing your job better. So now we're in the D rank where the funny Pokemon come out. Hisuian Arcanine is here. I feel like Hisuian Arcanine's pretty okay. It's Fire Rock, which is horrible, but it's got, what is it? Rock Head is the ability. Immunity to recoil, and it has 2 incredible recoil moves, Flare Blitz and Head Smash, which just hit incredibly hard. And it has E-Speed. Wild Charge is another coverage option with recoil that you're immune to.
Yeah.
Decent
And also,
option.
a lot of times you'll want to run E-Speed, a CB E-Speed with Terra Normal, so it also gets Double Edge as a nice option there, which can kind of be used to hit water types, things like Dondozo and Alomomola, which can be relevant in the stall matchup since Head Smash only has 8 PP.
D rank's appropriate?
I would say no. I would honestly put this C+. I don't think you could maybe even put it in B-. Honestly, it's a really solid breaker, difficult to fit, really weak to hazards, but incredibly powerful. And you can kind of just click Head Smash and just click Flare Blitz without real significant repercussions. I'm shocked to see it so low.
Yeah, it is a good breaker. I imagine like Low Kicks or something is similar, but maybe more desirable. But Arcanine Hisui does have more raw power.
In some ways, Low Kicks is definitely a better Pokemon against Hyper Offense. Like, nothing is going to rival that CB Tinted Lens first impression. But as a breaker, Hisui and Arcanine is much better. CB Low Kicks, even CB Terrabug, is not getting past a stall team. It never will. Not with the defensive Gliscor and Corviknight, all OPEX. It won't get past that. And Arcanine, on the other hand, is going to break down those teams. And unlike Low Kicks, it doesn't struggle as much with Pokemon like Zapdos and Moltres. It can kill them in one shot and is not worried about Flame Body.
Sounds pretty good to me, yeah. There's very few Pokemon in the game that can be so immediately offensively threatened. Up next is Azumarill, who is interesting. It's been a fantastic competitive Pokemon for many years, with Water Fairy typing just being so great. Huge power, obviously. Belly Drum sets, Choice Band sets. Probably suffering a bit from Ogerpon, who does its job and also kind of walls it. If it's a Choice Band set, it can't spam Aqua Jet or Waterfall. But at least this has fairy coverage to hit it. I guess you're slower and you get destroyed though.
Yeah, this is a victim of many things. I mean, Ogerpon Wellspring is definitely partially to blame. Having a really fantastic Pokemon with Water Absorb in the tier is a death sentence for Azu, but there are honestly many things that put the axe down on this thing's round head. It's got Raging Bolt is terrible. It hates the fact that Dragonite is in the tier. There are so many just good Pokemon right now that even resist water, that you think about, like on HO, like Roaring Moon, like Dragapult. It really is just a terrible Pokemon. I mean, there's not much to say about that. It's worse defensively than Primarina, and as a sweeper, almost completely useless.
Damn, folks. Azumarill. I feel like it was alright early on, but I guess so many things have been added that beat it. It's regrettable.
Yeah, maybe before Wellspring and Bolt, it was decent, but as for right now, I'd take it off the VR. I don't think it has any place in OU.
It's crazy to say, but yeah, you make a solid point. Basculegion's here. This is another Swift Swim Pokemon, but also it can have a role as an adaptability breaker with pretty nice water, stab, and priority. Although I don't think this gets a good ghost move. Did it get Poltergeist or did it not? I can't remember.
I'll double check. I believe not.
This just had Last Respect as its ghost move, which is of course a banned move.
Yeah, no Poltergeist.
It might get Shadow Snake.
It does not.
Yeah, that's rough.
Sadly.
That's rough.
Yep. If it did get Shadow Sneak, if it did get Poltergeist and Shadow Sneak, I could absolutely see myself running Male Basculegion as an adaptability breaker outside of range, so it could kind of escape being in that bubble of only being used on a terrible playstyle. But as they did not give it Sneak or Poltergeist, it's pretty much unusable.
Yeah. Belly Bolt is here, who I was very impressed with. There's a team that hit, I think, number 1, Belly Bolt Rain. The Electromorphosis ability actually gives this a pretty impressive damage output. It also has Soak, which can turn things into water type, which is fun. And it's like an alternate Raging Bolt that isn't weak to Fairy or Dragon or Ice. It's better neutral typing, which actually is pretty nice on rain teams. I think it gets Weather Ball as well. Is that true?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It gets. I think most would prefer to run muddy water since it's just a little bit more reliable. But definitely, if you're running it on rain, they'll prefer weather ball if they're the AV set at least. I think the most popular one right now is Soak Toxic Recover Discharge. It's a pretty fun set. I mean, it definitely has some challenges. It's not a great Pokemon, but some people have made it work, and it can be really annoying. It has some matchups where it will just dominate.
Yeah, and it's got offensive and defensive sets that are both pretty okay, which is fun. And I like the design of it, just simple mono electric type, but it's got such a cool ability. I love the getting the charge effect from it on hit. They should do stuff like that more. Those lesser seen effects that you'd never use. Like you don't use the move charge ever, but if you associate it with like an on hit effect, it's actually good.
Yeah, definitely a really cool ability.
Cyclizar is next, who was of course once incredibly broken with Shed Tail, but that move got banned. Now you just use Cyclizar as a regen rapid spinner with some interesting coverage options. It's pretty bad though, because it's so frail, but like rapid spin regen is alright. I can maybe see this being used on maybe a stall build of some sort or some sort of weird balance. I guess U-turn too.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely correct. That's the one role it has, is just on stall as a rapid spin user. And ever since Gliscor was added to the metagame, stall now has just a better form of stall, which is Gliscor boot spam. It's the only stall you see for a very good reason. It's the best by a very significant margin. So Cyclizar is another Pokemon I'd probably take off the VR. It has no place in the tier. Actually, the recent winner of a tournament I hosted, the prize was choosing what Pokemon I would build around. So I will soon be trying Life Orb Cyclizar, I'm probably going to go for like Overheat Draco knockoff Double Edge with Regenerator to kind of heal off the Life Orb. I think it'll be absolutely terrible, but maybe we'll see Cyclizar have a reason to exist, but I doubt it.
Yeah, seems rough. Yeah, the typing's interesting. You are immune to Ghost, but it's also just so bad. Normal Dragon in other areas is so terrible. Diancie's here though, regular old Diancie. And I think this is actually alright as similar to Reuniclus, as self-sufficient Trick Room threat, because it's very bulky. It has good stab types. The stats aren't great, but it can use Power Herb Meteor Beam to get the ball rolling with that. And it's got Earth Power for coverage. It's actually kind of okay on like it doesn't even have to be all in Trick Room. This can just be like your cleaner or something.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's not great, but as you said, it is one of those rare cases of self-sufficient TR setter, and it can set rocks while also having really solid defenses. So not good, not particularly good, but it deserves some respect. It's not terrible.
It's rankable. It does something. Indeedee is, of course, the only Psychic Terrain setter, so that is just literally enough to rank it. How's Psychic Terrain as a strat? It was really popular early on, I remember, with like Armor Rouge, Poltergeist. That was team back in the day.
Yeah, so it's basically, it's usable. It's extremely gimmicky. It relies on Focus Sash for Poltergeist. If you have a Rillaboom, it's an instant loss. You can never beat a Rillaboom.
Oh yeah, true.
And so that's
rough.
just good game. It really struggles with Ice Spinner Tusk. A lot of if you face a team that has like an Ice Spinner on anything else, because it can at least kind of pressure Tusk, because a lot of the Pokemon happen to kill Great Tusk, Indeedee included. If you face a Treads with Ice Spinner, you're probably cooked as well. So it's just an extremely inconsistent, gimmicky play style that really has no place in top level competitive play. But you can use it and you can cheese some wins.
Yeah, back in the day, Ice Spinner was not really the most common option on Tusk, but now Gliscor exists, and pretty much every Tusk wants Ice Spinner, or it's at least way more common. So that's rough, because that also removes Terrain, if you didn't know. And Rillaboom exists before Rillaboom didn't exist, so yeah, that's rough for Psychic Terrain. If it was maybe attached to a better Pokemon like Tapu Lele, you might see it more, but it's a bad Pokemon. It's a terrible Pokemon.
I have seen one thing. The one thing it gets over Lele is that it gets Expanding Force. So I have seen some specs and Scarf sets that kind of use Indeedee not on Psychic Terrain, but just for its own merits, which I find actually extremely interesting, because it does get Healing Wish, which is another thing to keep in mind.
And it can't get Sucker Punched, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I'd actually say I'm curious. Indeedee is something I'm definitely going to give another shot. It's rankable, but it's not great, but it's worth a try.
Iron Jugulus is on here, much to my dismay. The worst Pokemon ever created, but it's all right, I guess. It's Dark Flying with Booster Energy. It used to be used on Rain. Probably that's not why it's ranked here though, because Rain sucks. But it's got decent coverage. It's got Earth Power, Dark Pulse, Hurricane. Do you ever see Iron Jugulus do stuff?
I do. I will say the one thing it can do well, which is nice that it has over Hydreigon, is Knockoff. Because it has Knockoff and Taunt, it can kind of actually break some teams and if you lead with it, I remember SRN had a cool innovation, a bulky set that could live a Rabombi Moonblast, so you could lead with it against webs and taunt. So it kind of shuts, it's a bit of a counter lead in that sense, because it can lead against, say, a Glamora, live a power gem and just earth power and then finish it off. It can lead against Rabombi and taunt. It can lead against Tusk and counter lead that. So it's got some useful properties, but it does heavily rely on hitting Hurricane, which is obviously a terrible move, and it is a bad Pokemon. I think your hatred of Jugulus is well deserved.
Iron Mugulus, on the other hand, is, we don't talk about that, but yeah.
No, yeah, that thing has absolutely broken stats. I was shocked when I first saw it. We've got to keep it away from the tier.
For sure.
Knowing the SV player base, they might not even ban Mug.
No, it's ranked in RU at the moment.
Scary.
It's ranked in RU.
Oh, really? I didn't. What happened to it? Did they give it no moves?
It gets walled by a Great Tusk, yeah.
Oh, well, that's a relief. I'm happy to hear that.
Jirachi's on here, which is surprising. I don't think I've ever seen a Jirachi before. It is D rank, of course. I mean, Jirachi is like one of the most diverse Pokemon in history with so many options, so there's probably something it can do.
Yeah, I mean, it can still run its Trick, Healing Wish, Scarf set. It's not good at all. Scarf steel coverage has never been worse. Yeah, it's pretty terrible. I mean, you can run sub-Calm Mind sets, but there are better Pokemon for that. Really, it's just outclassed in every way. I don't see why it's on the OU VR.
Would it perhaps do what Iron Crown does, but with slightly different options? Like, walling similar things, but it's got, like, it can slam power or something? That's probably not even good in the metagame. Gliscor and Goldengo running around.
I suppose it could. Probably the best Jirachi sets would be Calm Mind sub, or Calm Mind 3 attacks. And it could do that, maybe better, or as about as good as Iron Crown. I mean, I suppose it's doing probably a weakness policy set. It does that about as well as Iron Crown would.
Yeah, it doesn't seem good though. Kingdra's here. Probably just a Swift Swim Pokemon. Is it even that good in modern gen? I know Golduck is an alternative.
Not much to say. It pretty much, it clicks Draco. It has Flip Turn, which is nice. So it's usable theoretically, but Primarina's popularity really hurt it. And of course, true, like all Pokemon that are on Rain and especially locked into water moves, Wellspring.
It does get Hurricane though, at least. That's pretty good.
Yeah, probably you would want to run, if you were to run a Kingdra set, it would be Draco, Flip Turn, Surf, Hurricane would be the best, so you have that way of one-shotting Wellspring. But if you're facing a team with any way of scouting it, say like a Galarian Slowking, then it can't do anything. It can't touch you.
I wonder if you don't even run Specs, because locking into anything sucks so much. Like an Orb or something might be better.
You can go with Orb, but then you miss out on a lot of power, and then you're also taking Chip, and Kingdra really needs its health because it's so close to just being killed by every priority move, really. Sucker, Glide, E-Speed, and Thunderclap.
Rough for Kingdra in this gen for sure. Mimikyu is on here. I think this is a new addition. I really like Mimikyu.
Mimikyu been around for a while. I might be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it's in the tier.
Unranked to D. These are the new additions.
Okay.
Diancie, Mimikyu, and Vileplume were new ones. It might have been like used by people, but it was not on the VR.
Oh, okay. So I thought you meant new to the generation, like added in a DLC.
Oh, nah. New to the VR itself.
Okay. Got it. Yes. I haven't checked out a lot of the other VRs, but yeah, that makes sense.
But this has it's got the inbuilt substitute with the disguise ability. Ghost Fairy is a really good typing, and it has Swords Dance Sweeper sets. You can use Red Card with an interesting synergy because you can take a hit, force something to switch out. It can also be a Trick Room Pokemon. That's probably not that good in singles though. That's more of a doubles scenario.
Yeah, it's not great. There are better Trick Room setters. It can run Trick Room D-Bond. It probably the most popular set it runs is SD, Play Rough, Sneak, Drain Punch, which is nice because it can actually kind of provide an answer to Kingambit, which is fun. Not a great Pokemon, but you definitely do have to respect that ability. I mean, it can stop a lot of really threatening common sweepers. It can be a big pain for Iron Moth, Kingambit, Iron Valiant, Roaring Moon, Dragonite. So probably underrated. I feel like Mimikyu deserves to be explored a little bit more.
Seems cool. Like a Ghost Fairy matching up into Kingambit nicely is actually a pretty big deal. Necrozma's on here. Good old base Necrozma. I think it has decent natural bulk, and it has agility, stored power, that kind of thing. But I mean, those sets on many different Pokemon on this list have been deemed pretty inconsistent, especially with the rise of Encore and stuff. And as a mono, it's probably very similar to what Cresselia is trying to do.
Yeah, it definitely can run those kinds of like Calm Mind stored power sets. Probably the most popular, it can do a sort of a Reuniclus thing where it sets its own Trick Room and takes advantage of it.
Oh, that's true as well, yeah.
I've seen some just like classic lead sets that will run Stealth Rock, Meteor Beam with Power Herb, and then Photon Geyser, Heat Heat Wave. That can work as well, but overall not a great Pokemon. And a lot of times if you want to run that kind of lead psychic type that can hit hard and set rocks, you'll really defer to Deoxys Speed, which just has better utility moves, things like Knock Off, and just faster, so you can get a hit off before potentially just being taunted, set up on, or one-shotted.
Sucks that two of the Trick Room setters that can pose a threat are both psychic types, which is just such a rough thing in this format.
Yeah, I mean, Prism Armor helps out a bit, but you're still getting two-shot by almost everything in the tier.
Poltegeist is here, another cup-based Pokemon. It's got the Shell Smash set, which is probably alright, but that was usually relegated to Psychic Terrain, which is much worse now, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, if you see Priority, you're done. If you see a Ting Lu, you're done. If you see a King Gambit, you're done. It's reliant on Terra, and even then, inconsistent. So, just a really terrible Pokemon.
Quagsire is here. Waterground Unaware Wall, probably okay. I imagine its bulk is not really up to modern standards, though.
No, it's a niche pick on some stall teams, and that's about it.
Yeah, as it often is in many generations. Quaquaval is damn low. This seems crazy. Seems alright to me. It's water fighting. Aqua Step's really good. It has rapid spin as well. They're probably not the best user of it though. And it's got decent coverage. Like, stats are average though, and its attack is pretty low. But it has Moxie as well. Do you think this is low for Quaquaval? I guess it sucks against Wellspring.
Yeah, I think it is. D rank is a bit rude. I'd put it in maybe C or C minus. It definitely is by far the worst starter and doesn't deserve a high placement. This is a bit low, but the main problems, the metagame just really worked against it. Primarina becoming popular was obviously really rough, but the two big things that made Quaquaval what it is today are Raging Bolt and Ogerpon Wellspring. Those two together really did a number on Quaquaval.
That's a common sentiment, isn't it? It's those two keeping everything down. Damn.
Yeah, and so yeah, Quaquaval has just had a really rough go of it, and it's also bad against really all the priority, with the exception of Sucker Punch. But it still is seen sometimes. Rapid Spin is a very high value move, and its defensive typing is quite good, kind of sharing that typing with Keldeo, which has seen success. And it does have a lot of good moves. It gets Triple Axle, Ice Spinner, Knock Off, Aqua Step, Wave Crash, Aqua Jet, Taunt, Bulk Up, Swords Dance. It's not unviable. It can be used, but it's very rarely good, and a lot of the top tier Pokemon destroy it.
Sandy Shocks is here. I feel like Sandy Shocks is quite good. It's a Photosynthesis Mon. It's got Electric Ground Stab, which is actually kind of nice, into Raging Bolt. It's also immune to Thunderclap. It does sort of rely on Terra, though, to pose a threat to ground types, because it doesn't have any grass or ice coverage, so that's a big drawback for it. And this was better when there were less electric types in the game. Now there's way more electric types to actually outclass this. But this also feels a bit low. Or do you agree?
I would say you're probably right. It is extremely Terra reliant as a breaker. As a breaker, it's doing almost nothing. But as a Pokemon, I'd say probably the best set is just Dual Stab, Stealth Rock, Spikes, because it cannot touch Landorus and Gliscor, which sucks. And so you could run Terra Blast Ice, and that's not a bad set. You can run like Rocks or Spikes with Dual Stab, Terra Blast Ice. But having to use Terra just to get past Pokemon that are on almost every team is not great. And even with Terra Blast Ice, you're doing almost nothing to Ting Lu. But booster speed hazard setting sets are still okay. So D rank is a bit too low. I'd probably put it in C.
And this Scream Tail, who is, I think, an interesting Pokemon, because it can be a Carmine Pokemon with some impressive bulk, but it's also damn fast for such a Pokemon. Its typing does suck, though, Psychic Fairy, and it's very low special attack as well. But it is interesting, and it probably has some niche value for that reason. Like, it's so unique that nothing else can quite fill its shoes.
Yeah, it's like the fastest defensive Encore Pokemon that exists, and there is some inherent value in that. Thunderwave sets are pretty good as well, like, Wish Tech, T-Wave.
It's got a lot of good utility, yeah.
Wish Passing in general is nice. It's a usable Pokemon, but almost never. There are typically things that are just better for the job. If you wanted to set rocks, you'd probably rather use Clefable or Tinkaton. If you want a Calm Mind Pokemon, Clefable is better. If you're looking for a Wish Pass, or Olo is usually better, but there's probably a team out there that wants what Screamtail is offering.
Yeah, the fair Pokemon to have here. I think it's cool to see it ranked at least, because I quite like his design. Talonflame is here, probably because it's a defog setter that threatens Goldango and has Flame Body, Roost, and U-turn, which is pretty good, but yeah, it's a very poor defensively. But definitely could see Talonflame working on a specific team.
Yeah, it's a niche pick on stall. As I said, a lot of stall teams have given up on defog. They don't really care anymore because the thought process is, well, I'm just going to run Gliscor and a bunch of boots. But for those stall teams that still do try to remove, Cyclizar and Talonflame are your two choices because they can threaten Goldengo and remove. There are some other sets. I've started kind of experimenting with a choice band variant, but I don't think it'll work. Probably its one role will just be that niche stall ring.
Yeah. Vileplume is a very cool new addition. It's so cool to see Vileplume on an OU ranking. It might honestly just be a flavor of the month thing and it doesn't deserve it, but it does wall Ogerpon Wellspring pretty well, and it has Strength Sap and Leech Seed. And it can also kind of wall fairy types like Primarina, Valiant, Clefable. It's kind of good. It's actually got more going on than some of these other ones here, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically an alternative Amoonguss. And it does have a cool ability in Effect Spore with that 30% contact doing either poison, paralysis, or sleep. So that is pretty nice.
Let's go Vileplume. Does it still get Aroma? Or did it lose that?
Everything lost Aromatherapy.
Oh, damn.
They took Aromatherapy and Heal Bell away from, I believe, I think there's only one thing in the entire game that gets it, and that's Calyrex Ice Rider. Weirdly enough.
What the hell?
Yeah, I think Aroma, I'm going to confirm that. Actually, no. I think it may have been just the PS error that's been taken out. I'm looking again, and it appears to be not a single Pokemon.
That's such a weird thing to remove. You'd think that's an important thing to have.
Yeah, and Heal Bell, they took that away from everything with the exception of Blissey and Chimecho.
Blissey gets it at least, yeah.
Yeah, I was a bit angry about that one. I'm like, really? You left it with Blissey? Come on.
Probably the only thing that would use it. But Vileplume might use Aroma. Vileplume might use Aroma. It's something.
Yeah, it definitely would. I mean, it's one of those Pokemon that has found its way onto stall teams for only one reason, and that is Ogerpon Wellspring. So there's one thing. Ogerpon Wellspring has taken down and ruined the viability of many, many Pokemon.
Except Vileplume.
For some special little grass types, it has given them a chance.
And that's reason enough to keep it. Am I right, folks? Let's keep it in. We're going to give Vileplume something to do. Last is Wo-Chien, who is on the ranking. Can we give a round of applause for Wo-Chien being on here at all? It is the worst of the quartet, for sure. Dark Grass is just a horrible typing. Times 4 weak to Bug is a death sentence. You're weak to Fairy, Fire, Ice, everything on the planet almost fighting. And you don't really... You're very bulky, at least, with the ability and the stats, but it's probably just way too fast-paced of a meta for this to do anything. It doesn't wall anything in particular. It's got Knock, Leech Seed. I think there's a Wo-Chien stall team that did something that I saw, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to disagree with you on the it can't do anything. There's one thing it can actually do very reliably, and that is answer King Gambit, which definitely deserves some respect. So there is one viable Wo-Chien set. It's just one, and it is Leech, Sub, Protect, Knockoff.
That sounds about right.
So what you do is you come into the King Gambit, and it has 70 speed, so you can EV it pretty easily to outspeed King Gambit. You need to put 172 speed, and I think if you're assuming that King Gambit's adamant, you only need 96. You put the rest in HP and defense, and you can just Leech and then sub your way through Gambit. The other nice thing about this set with Leech Knock is because Leech Seed kind of forces a Pokemon out, the only way to get rid of that debilitating Leech Seed is switching. You can almost always get 2 guaranteed knockoffs with this Wo-Chien. Problem being, one of those knockoffs might be on a Gliscor, so it might be useless. Or now, this set's super inconsistent. Obviously, like Clefable to hard walls, you're doing nothing to Gliscor. If a Goldengo terras or is just a defensive Goldengo, you're doing no damage. So it's not at all a good Pokemon, but some hyper offense teams just get farmed by it. Like if you Terra Poison this thing, you can honestly just Leech Sub-Tect on an entire team. So I'd say I'm going to try it at some point. I think it's viable, but it's not good at all. If it is viable, it is just barely.
That's interesting, though. Gliscor has farmed that. I think it even out-heals Leech Seed, so that doesn't even force it out, which sucks.
I think Leech and Poison Heal are exactly the same. So in a 1v1, Wo-Chien will beat Gliscor unless it gets poisoned or the Gliscor is SD.
Thing is, it can just set hazards in your face and not worry too much.
Exactly. If it's not SD, it'll have hazards, and it's not much minding the probably 6 or 7% knockoffs you're doing.
Yeah. Well, that does it. The whole VR. Thank you so much for your time, Pink Across. This was a long one. but your insight was incredible. Thank you so much. And there is one thing we could talk about before we go, and that is that Palafin is currently being tested again. What do you think about that? Do you think Palafin, with Ogerpon Wellspring in the format, or Wallet, and different stuff available in general, do you think Palafin could be a healthy presence now?
You know, I was actually just giving it a try right before we did this call. I was initially thinking it would be too much, but upon testing it, even just for these few games, I think it might be manageable. We'll have to see, but I think the playstyles that Palafin was strongest against are those balance and bulky balance teams. As I said, those teams that are already been just kicked while they're down over and over again. So it's sort of their best against a playstyle that's already terrible. And these bulky offense teams do have really good tools against it. They're running Zamazenta, they're running Dragapult, they're running Ogerpon Wellspring, they're running Raging Bolt. So I may be wrong about Palafin being too much. I think based on just the little bit of few games I've played, I'm thinking we might have a Pokemon that stays in the tier. And that would be nice. I think any additional strong priority options are welcome additions. And maybe, just maybe, it'll give Rain another boost, but probably not. Probably Wellspring will still be too much.
And of course, Vileplume is now a metagame staple who handles Palafin very easily.
Yes, yeah, Vileplume is going to be a big, with that Vileplume being around 20% usage, is really going to be a big problem for Palafin.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Pinkacross. Everyone check out Pinkacross's YouTube channel. It's very good. Pinkacross is a great teacher. He explains things in words that I think are very easily understood. Concepts like risk-reward assessment, decision-making, and even how to structure teams. These are pretty hard concepts to communicate, but he does a great job, I think.
I really appreciate the kind words, and thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to appear on the channel, and I've had a lot of fun discussing the VR. So you guys can let us know in the comments if you agree or disagree and why, and look forward to engaging with some of you.
Thank you. Take care.